Hi everyone, I'm Amelia Jason and I'm 21. My childhood wasn't happy. My dad, Davis, and I didn't get along. We used to be close, but everything changed when he divorced my mom and left us with a lot of financial problems. It felt like he abandoned me, like I didn't matter to him anymore. He started a new life, focusing on himself, his hobbies, and dating. After the divorce, my mom, Rose, and I had a tough time. We went from having a good life to struggling to make ends meet. My mom, Rose, worked incredibly hard to take care of us after my dad left. She never gave up, even when things were tough. She started a small business and worked tirelessly to make it grow, and it did. Our lives went from being difficult to being comfortable again. It was amazing to see my mom's strength and determination. But then, something unexpected happened. My mom got sick. It was a big shock for us. The person who had fought so hard for us was now fighting a serious illness. It was a tough time, but we were determined to support her through it. My mom's illness turned our lives upside down. I took care of her and hoped she would get better. We tried everything, but sometimes things don't go as planned. Sadly, my mom passed away, leaving a huge gap in my life that can never be filled. As her only child, I had to face the difficult time after her death alone. While I was grieving, I found out that she had left her house to me. It was her last gift, showing me how much she loved me and the life we shared. When I entered the house, now mine, it felt like my mom was hugging me one last time. The house held many happy and sad memories of our time together. But what hurt me the most was that my dad, Davis, and his new wife, Sarah, didn't even come to my mom's funeral. It was as if he had completely forgotten about her and didn't care. This made me very angry. How could they be so cruel? Didn't my dad care about how I was feeling? Even months after my mom's death, the pain still felt fresh. I tried to find comfort in memories and friends, but I couldn't shake off the bitter feelings. The house my mom left me was beautiful, but it reminded me of her absence. I tried to make peace with the memories and make the house my own, but it took time. Things were getting better until one day my dad, Davis, showed up at my doorstep unexpectedly. It had been months since my mom's funeral, and he acted like nothing was wrong. I opened the door, and our eyes met. He looked surprised to see the pain and anger on my face. He tried to smile, but it didn't work. We stood there in awkward silence with a lot of unspoken words between us. I was angry and disappointed, and it was hard to keep those feelings inside. Finally, he said, "Hey, Jason, can we talk?" in a sorry tone, but it didn't feel sincere. His presence in my house brought up a mix of emotions, and I just stared at him. I wasn't fooled by my dad's weak attempt to make things right. "Don't pretend to apologize, Davis." "I'm not buying it," I said. My voice was filled with anger. "You left us to struggle while you lived a life of luxury. Now you show up like nothing's wrong." Davis's face turned red with anger, and he became defensive. "You need to respect me, Jason," he said firmly. I laughed in disbelief. "Respect is earned, Davis. You lost mine when you abandoned us for your own desires. You can't demand respect after all the pain you caused." As we argued, I saw Sarah getting out of their luxurious car and walking towards us. Seeing her only made me angrier, reminding me how my dad chose a life of extravagance over his family. When she reached the doorstep, I said, "What brings you here, Sarah? You didn't even come to my mom's funeral, but now you're here." Sarah made a weak excuse. "We were busy, Jason. We had commitments." Her words only made me angrier. "You were too busy to attend my mom's funeral. That shows how little you care about her memory and our family." I felt a surge of anger and frustration as I looked at my dad and Sarah standing in front of me. They were still the same selfish people who showed off their wealth and indulged in luxuries. Their presence in my home, acting like nothing was wrong, made me even angrier. "What do you two want from me?" I asked them. "Haven't you hurt me enough already?" My dad, Davis, said, "Jason, we need to talk. The truth is, our life isn't as great as it seems on social media. We're struggling financially, and we even need to sell the Aston Martin outside to get some money for something important." Sarah, who had been quiet until then, took off her coat, revealing her pregnant belly. I was shocked and angry. "You're telling me that you got someone pregnant who's young enough to be my sister? This is a sick joke, right?" I said, my voice filled with anger. Davis, now getting defensive, said some very hurtful things to me. His words were mean and unexpected, and I couldn't believe my father could be so cruel. "You think you're so smart talking to me like that? I left you and your mom because I couldn't stand being around someone as stupid as you. You're useless and hopeless. I didn't do anything wrong, so shut up." I was shocked and couldn't believe what I was hearing. I just stood there, refusing to accept that my father was speaking to me like this in my own home. "Get out," I said firmly. "Get out before I call the police. Leave my property." Davis smiled slightly and said, "Actually, that's why we're here." "What do you mean?" I asked, my anger rising again. "You're going to have to leave this house, Jason." "It's the only option," Davis said, his eyes gleaming with a sinister intent. I was furious, my heart racing with anger. "You're crazy, Davis. My mom gave me this house, the woman you abandoned. You think you can just take it away? Never. You think you deserve this house? Think again. This house is legally mine, and you can't take it away," I said, standing my ground. Davis sneered at me. "Are you sure about that, Jason? I have connections. I know the county clerk, and a simple phone call could make your name on that deed disappear." I was even angrier now. "How dare you? He used his connections to manipulate the system and take what was mine. You'd stoop that low to steal this house from me? You're no better than a common criminal," I said, my voice strong and forceful. They were taken aback by my intensity, but as they realized they weren't going to win, they looked nervous and scared. They knew they had underestimated me and my determination to protect what was mine and my mom's. With all my strength, I yelled at them to leave my property immediately. They turned pale and finally left the house they had tried to take. Even though he was scared, Davis still tried to intimidate me with threats of ruining my life. "You'll regret not listening to me, Jason," Davis said. "I tried to be nice, but you didn't want that. Just wait, you'll be begging for mercy when I'm done with you." After they left, I was left standing there, my heart racing with anger, frustration, and determination. I knew this battle was far from over. In the silence that followed, I felt a sense of urgency. I knew my father had more power and influence than I did, and his connections and willingness to bend the rules posed a big threat to my dreams of keeping this house. I understood it wouldn't be easy. This wasn't just a fight for a physical space, it was a battle against a system that favored the powerful and well-connected. But I wasn't willing to give up. I would fight hard to protect the legacy my mother left me. The house represented memories, love, and sacrifices. It was a symbol of my identity and my journey toward freedom. With newfound determination, I took a deep breath and prepared myself for the tough journey ahead. The fight for justice had just begun. Weeks after our confrontation, my father still sent me hateful messages and threats. I ignored them, knowing they were meant to hurt me. Instead, I collected evidence, saved every message, and wrote down every word he said. I knew I had to take action, so I went to the county clerk's office. This was the place where my father's plan could become a reality, but I wasn't afraid. I had to face the person who had the power to make decisions. As I entered the office, my heart raced with anxiety and determination. I approached the clerk's desk, where a middle-aged man with tired eyes looked up at me. "Excuse me, sir," I said. "I need to talk to you about something important." The county clerk looked at me with curiosity and skepticism, studying my appearance. "What do you want?" he asked gruffly. I gathered all my courage and poured my heart out to the county clerk, sharing my story and all the struggles my mom and I had faced. I told him about Davis's absence at my mom's funeral and the threats that still haunted me. I showed him the evidence of Davis's manipulation and begged him to see the truth. As I spoke, the clerk's expression changed from indifference to genuine concern. "Please, sir, understand the truth." I pleaded with him. "Davis has twisted the story to make himself the victim. Don't let him deceive you and take what's rightfully mine. I'm all alone and need your help." The clerk's eyes softened as he leaned back in his chair, taking a moment to process what I said. "I had no idea," he said, shaking his head. "I have a son around your age, and I can't imagine what you're going through. Davis made himself out to be the victim, saying you were a spoiled brat, but something didn't feel right. Maybe that's why I was hesitant when he asked for this favor. I had a feeling something was wrong, but I didn't realize it was this serious." His words were like a shock to my already hurting heart, but they gave me hope that someone was finally listening. I felt a glimmer of hope that things might work out fairly. "Thank you for listening, sir," I said, my voice full of gratitude. "Your understanding means a lot to me. I just want you to see the truth behind Davis's lies." The county clerk nodded, looking determined. "I'll do what's right, but you have to promise not to tell anyone that I'm doing this as a favor. Sometimes, I help my friends in ways that aren't exactly legal, so if you tell anyone, I'll find you and make sure you regret it." I swallowed hard, scared of the man in front of me. "Honestly, sir, I don't care if you're not following all the rules. I just want to make sure my house is mine and my father can't control it." "I've got it," he said firmly. "I believe you've been through a lot, and you shouldn't have to worry about owning your house again." Leaving the office, I felt a huge weight lifted off my shoulders. The battle wasn't over yet, but I had hoped that the truth would come out and I would get what was mine. I went to my father's house, but it looked empty and abandoned. The fancy furniture was gone, probably sold to prepare for the new baby. After waiting for a long time, Davis finally opened the door, looking terrible. He hadn't slept or showered in days, and seeing me made him even angrier. "What do you want?" Davis growled. "I just came to tell you something," I said, standing up for myself. "I'm keeping the house, and you can't make me leave, so give up trying." "Like hell you are," Davis yelled, his face red with anger. "I'm your father, and I get to decide." "You're no father to me, just a pest," I shot back, my anger rising. Davis sneered. "We'll see about that. I always get what I want." I smiled, feeling triumphant. I already talked to the county clerk, and he's on my side. I have the papers right here, and the house is mine. Davis's face contorted in shock and horror as he realized his plan was falling apart. He stuttered, trying to find words, but I just laughed, celebrating my win. "You can't tell anyone I tried to help you, or we'll both get in trouble," Davis said, his voice desperate. "Looks like you and Sarah need to start house hunting," I taunted, rubbing it in. Davis's face fell. "Actually, Sarah is leaving me. She's not happy that I couldn't get your house quickly enough, and she's given me an ultimatum." I shrugged. "That's tough for you." Davis's eyes begged me. "Jason, please let me move in with you. I can't take it here anymore. Everything is too much for me. I haven't slept or eaten, and Sarah is driving me crazy with her demands." I laughed. You're still acting like a child even at your age. You think I'm going to let you stay with me? Think again. Try a homeless shelter, they might have room for you. Davis's face twisted in anger. You're a heartless and thoughtless person. You'll regret this, Jason. I smiled. I'm not scared of you, Davis. You're getting what you deserve. Karma's a bitch, isn't it? As I walked away, I knew Davis's life was going downhill. He became a social outcast, and his alcohol addiction took over. I heard Sarah divorced him, took most of his money, and left him alone and hopeless in a hotel room, struggling to figure out his next move. But I knew I had one, and I was ready to fight for anything my mother left me. Davis would never dare to confront me with the same anger and entitlement again. I was no longer a kid, and I had a lot to lose. I'll fight for anything my mother left me, I said firmly. And if he's foolish enough to try me again, I'll make sure he regrets it.
Subscribe to Cheating Tales Lab for more original and exclusive stories. We hope you enjoy this one. Let's begin. Ethan Blackwood's fingers drummed an impatient rhythm on the steering wheel of his Audi R8 as he navigated the congested downtown streets. The sleek sports car, usually a source of pride, felt like a gilded cage in the stop-and-go traffic. His mind raced, consumed by the forgotten wallet that threatened to derail his $1 million proposal presentation. "Damn it," he muttered, glancing at his empty breast pocket for the 100th time. The thought of asking Victoria to bring it down to his office made him wince. He could already hear her sardonic comments about his absent-mindedness. With a sudden jerk of the wheel, Ethan cut across 2 lanes of honking traffic, ignoring the chorus of blaring horns. He'd grab the wallet himself and be back on the road in 10 minutes. No need to give Victoria more ammunition for her little jabs. As he pulled into the private parking area of his luxurious penthouse, Ethan's eyes narrowed at the unfamiliar Porsche 911 parked haphazardly nearby. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up as he approached their door, an unsettling silence greeting him as he entered. "Victoria," he called out, his voice echoing in the vast open-plan living area. No response. The muffled sounds coming from the master bedroom sent a chill down his spine. Ethan's hand hesitated on the doorknob for a split second before he pushed it open. The sight that greeted him sent his world spinning off its axis. A shirtless man, tall and muscular, stood by the bed, carelessly buttoning his pants. His dark hair was mussed, his chiseled features twisted in surprise, and something that looked unsettlingly like amusement. Rage exploded in Ethan's chest. He lunged forward, grabbing the stranger by the collar. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, his voice trembling with fury. Before the man could answer, a flash of silk caught Ethan's peripheral vision. Victoria rushed out of the ensuite bathroom, cinching a robe around her waist. Her face cycled through shock, defiance, and finally settled on a look of cold detachment that chilled Ethan to his core. "Let him go, Ethan," she said, her voice steady and devoid of any guilt or shame. "This is Xavier Thornton, my new love." Ethan's grip on Xavier's collar loosened, more from shock than compliance. He stumbled back a step, his mind reeling as he tried to process the surreal scene before him. "What was I to you for 13 years, Victoria?" The words tumbled out before he could stop them, raw and vulnerable. Victoria's lips curled into a cruel smile that Ethan had never seen before. It transformed her beautiful face into something alien and malevolent. "A tool, Ethan," she replied, her voice dripping with disdain. "Just a surviving tool. Xavier here is everything you're not, passionate, spontaneous, and exciting." Each word was a dagger, precisely aimed to inflict maximum pain. Ethan felt his chest constrict, struggling to draw breath as the full weight of her betrayal crashed down upon him. Fury coursing through his veins, Ethan ordered them both out of his house. As Victoria gathered her things, she hissed, "I'll make sure you regret this decision, Ethan. You have no idea what I'm capable of." The threat hung in the air as Victoria and Xavier left, the sound of the Porsche's engine fading into the distance. Ethan stood alone in the bedroom, His world shattered around him. The following days passed in a blur for Ethan. He moved through the prestigious architecture firm like a ghost, going through the motions but feeling utterly disconnected. Every sympathetic glance, every hushed conversation that stopped abruptly when he entered a room, felt like salt in his still raw wounds. It was during a particularly grueling meeting that Marcus Steele, Ethan's colleague and best friend at the firm, finally confronted him. As the other partners filed out of the conference room, Marcus hung back, concern etched deep in the lines of his face. "Ethan, what's going on with you, man?" Marcus asked, his voice low and urgent. "You've been off your game all week. That proposal you presented just now, it's not up to your usual standards. Talk to me." Ethan looked up at his friend, seeing the genuine worry in his eyes. The weight of his secret was crushing him, and Marcus's concern finally cracked his resolve. "It's Victoria," Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. She's been cheating on me. I walked in on them, Marcus, in our bed." Marcus's eyes widened in shock, then narrowed in anger. "Jesus, Ethan, I'm so sorry. What are you going to do?" As Ethan confided in Marcus, detailing Victoria's threats and his fears, neither man noticed the intern hovering nearby, her eyes wide with interest. By the end of the day, the entire firm would be buzzing with whispers about Ethan Blackwood's scandalous divorce. Meanwhile, Victoria and Xavier began their campaign of harassment against Ethan. They spread malicious rumors in their social circle, claiming Ethan was abusive and controlling. Victoria reached out to Ethan's clients, attempting to tarnish his professional reputation with false accusations. The attacks came from all sides, leaving Ethan reeling. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from concerned friends and colleagues, asking about the rumors. Clients called, demanding explanations for accusations they'd heard. Ethan found himself constantly on the defensive, struggling to maintain his composure and his reputation. As the pressure mounted, Ethan felt increasingly cornered and desperate. The final straw came when he received a call from his bank. Victoria had drained their joint accounts, leaving him nearly penniless. This last betrayal ignited a fierce desire for revenge within Ethan. He realized that playing defense wasn't enough. He needed to fight back. With renewed determination, Ethan reached out to his old college friend, Olivia Chun, now a private investigator. They met at a quiet cafe, away from prying eyes. "Olivia, I need your help," Ethan said, his voice low and urgent. "I need you to dig into Victoria and Xavier's backgrounds. There has to be something I can use against them." Olivia studied him carefully, noting the dark circles under his eyes and the tension in his jaw. "This isn't like you, Ethan." Ethan's eyes hardened. "They've left me no choice, Liv. Victoria's trying to destroy everything I built. I need to protect myself." Olivia nodded slowly. "All right, I'll see what I can find. But Ethan, be careful. Revenge can be a double-edged sword." As Olivia began her investigation, Ethan felt a glimmer of hope for the first time since his world had imploded. He didn't know what Olivia would uncover, but he was certain of one thing. He wouldn't go down without a fight. The spark of revenge had been ignited, and Ethan was ready to fan it into a roaring flame. Olivia Chun sat in her dimly lit office, surrounded by stacks of files and the soft glow of multiple computer screens. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, eyes darting between documents as she pieced together the puzzle of Victoria Blackwood and Xavier Thornton's lives. The deeper she dug, the more her brow furrowed. This was no simple case of infidelity. It was a tangled web of deceit that stretched back years. Her phone buzzed. Ethan's name flashed on the screen. "What have you found?" His voice was taut with barely contained tension. Olivia leaned back in her chair, rubbing her eyes. "You might want to sit down for this, Ethan. It's not good." She heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "Just tell me, Liv." "All right," she said, pulling up a series of documents on her main screen. "Let's start with your wife's lover. Xavier Thornton? That's not his real name. He's actually Xavier Reeves, a known con artist. He's got a history of seducing wealthy women and swindling them out of their money. He's been operating under the radar for years, always managing to stay one step ahead of the law. Ethan's silence was deafening. Olivia continued, her voice softening slightly. And Victoria, I'm sorry, Ethan, but she's not who you thought she was either. I've uncovered a pattern of infidelity going back at least 5 years. But that's not the worst of it. She's been involved in several fraudulent business dealings. Shell companies, embezzlement, the works. Jesus Christ, Ethan muttered. How? How did I not see any of this? Olivia's heart ached for her friend. These people are professionals, Ethan. They're experts at hiding their tracks. But now we know, and that gives us an advantage. There was a long pause before Ethan spoke again, his voice hardening with resolve. You're right. Knowledge is power. Send me everything you've got. It's time to fight back. As Olivia compiled her findings into a secure file, her mind raced with the implications. This wasn't just about helping a friend anymore. They were dealing with dangerous criminals. She made a mental note to beef up her own security measures. If Victoria and Xavier got wind of her investigation, things could get ugly fast. Across town, Ethan sat in his sparsely furnished apartment, staring at the laptop screen as Olivia's report populated with document after damning document. Each new revelation felt like a physical blow, but with each hit, his resolve strengthened. He reached for his phone, scrolling through his contacts until he found the name he was looking for. Liam Blackwood, his tech-savvy cousin. If anyone could help him gather the electronic evidence needed to bring Victoria and Xavier down, it was Liam. The phone rang twice before a cheerful voice answered. Ethan, long time no hear, cuz. What's up? Ethan's grip tightened on the phone. Liam, I need your help. It's bad. Really bad. The cheerfulness drained from Liam's voice, replaced by concern. What's going on, Ethan? I can't explain everything over the phone. Can you come over? And bring your gear. We've got some digital digging to do. There was a pause. Then Liam's voice came back, firm and determined. I'm on my way. Hang tight, cuz. Whatever this is, we'll figure it out together. As Ethan ended the call, he felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in weeks. With Olivia's investigative skills and Liam's technical expertise, they had a fighting chance. Victoria and Xavier had no idea what was coming for them. He turned back to the laptop, steeling himself to dive deeper into the sordid details of his wife's double life. Each revelation stoked the fire of his determination. They wanted to play dirty? Fine. He'd show them just how dirty he could get. The following weeks saw Ethan Blackwood undergo a transformation to the outside world. He appeared a broken man, stumbling through his days in a haze of despair. His colleagues at the architecture firm whispered behind his back, their faces etched with a mixture of pity and morbid fascination. But behind closed doors, a different Ethan emerged. With Liam hunched over multiple laptops and Olivia poring over stacks of documents, Ethan's apartment had become a war room. The walls were covered with timelines, connections, and strategies, all aimed at one goal: bringing Victoria and Xavier to justice. We need to lure them into a false sense of security, Ethan mused, pacing the length of the living room. Make them think they've won completely. Liam looked up from his screen, eyebrows raised. You sure about that, cuz? It's gonna mean taking some hits to your reputation. Ethan's jaw clenched. My reputation's already in tatters thanks to their smear campaign. At least this way, it serves a purpose. Olivia nodded approvingly. It's a smart play. If they think you're defeated, they might get sloppy, make mistakes. And so, Operation Broken Man began. Ethan started showing up to work disheveled, his eyes red-rimmed as if from crying or drinking. He fumbled presentations, missed deadlines, and generally gave the impression of a man on the verge of a complete breakdown. The whispers in the office grew louder. Poor Ethan, they'd say. He's really lost it since Victoria left him. Meanwhile, Victoria and Xavier reveled in their apparent victory. They were spotted at high-end restaurants, luxury boutiques, and exclusive clubs, spending Ethan's money with reckless abandon. Their laughter echoed through the social circles they once shared with Ethan, each public appearance another twist of the knife. But Ethan wasn't as broken as he appeared. Every night Liam, and Olivia worked tirelessly, building their case piece by piece. Liam's technical wizardry uncovered a trail of digital breadcrumbs linking Victoria and Xavier to their fraudulent activities. Olivia's network of contacts provided crucial pieces of the puzzle, filling in gaps and corroborating evidence. As their case grew stronger, Ethan realized they needed more. Victims' testimonies could be the nail in the coffin for Victoria and Xavier's operations. With Olivia's help, he began reaching out to those who had fallen prey to the duo's schemes. One name stood out: Sofia Alvarez, Victoria's former business partner. Ethan remembered her vaguely from cocktail parties and charity events, always standing slightly apart from the crowd, her eyes sharp and assessing. He'd always assumed she and Victoria had simply had a falling out. Now, he suspected there was much more to the story. Arranging a meeting with Sofia proved challenging. She was understandably wary, having been burned by Victoria before. But Ethan's persistence paid off, and she finally agreed to meet him at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town. Sofia arrived precisely on time, her posture rigid and her eyes guarded. She slid into the booth across from Ethan, studying him carefully. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice cool and measured. "I must admit, I was surprised to hear from you. What exactly is it you want from me?" Ethan leaned forward, his voice low and urgent. "The truth, Ms. Alvarez. About Victoria. About what really happened between you two." Sophia's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of pain crossing her face before she schooled her features back into neutrality. "And why should I dredge up ancient history? What's done is done." "Because it's not ancient history," Ethan replied, sliding a folder across the table. "It's happening again. Victoria and her new partner, Xavier, are running the same schemes. They've already hurt people. They'll keep hurting people unless we stop them." Sophia's hand trembled slightly as she opened the folder, her eyes scanning the documents within. With each page she turned, her composure cracked a little more. Finally, she looked up at Ethan, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I always wondered if I was the only one," she whispered. "If I was just weak, stupid." Ethan reached across the table, gently squeezing her hand. "You weren't weak or stupid, Sophia. You were a victim. But now, you have the power to make sure there are no more victims. Will you help us?" Sophia took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. When she met Ethan's gaze again, there was steel in her eyes. "Tell me what you need me to do." As Ethan left the cafe, Sophia's agreement to testify secure, he felt a surge of triumph. The trap was set. Now, it was time to spring it. The early morning stillness was shattered by the insistent buzzing of a phone. Special Agent Sarah Donovan fumbled for her cell, squinting at the bright screen. An anonymous tip. Another dead end, probably, but in her line of work, you never knew when a seemingly insignificant lead might crack a case wide open. As she listened to the distorted voice on the other end of the line, her eyes widened. Names, dates, account numbers. Whoever this was, they had serious intel. By the time the call ended, Sarah was wide awake, her mind racing with possibilities. "Johnson," she barked, striding into the office an hour later. "I need everything we got on a Xavier Reeves, a.k.a. Xavier Thornton, and get me a liaison at the SEC. We might have a big one on our hands." Across town, Ethan Blackwood sat in his car, heart pounding as he ended the call. The burner phone felt heavy in his hand as he tossed it into the passenger seat. There was no going back now. He had just set in motion a chain of events that would either save him or destroy him completely. His phone buzzed his real phone this time. A message from Liam. Package delivered to SC. Ball's in their court now. Ethan allowed himself a smile. Victoria and Xavier had no idea what was about to hit them. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. FBI agents combed through financial records, following the trail of breadcrumbs Ethan and his team had carefully laid out. SEC investigators pored over Victoria's business dealings, uncovering layers of fraud and deceit. Victoria, meanwhile, was beginning to sense that something was amiss. Her carefully crafted world was showing cracks, and she didn't like it one bit. She paced her luxury apartment, phone pressed to her ear. "I don't care what it takes," she hissed into the receiver. "Find out who's been digging into our affairs and shut them down. Now." But it was too late. The walls were already closing in, and Victoria's desperate attempts to plug the leaks only served to draw more attention to her activities. As the pressure mounted, Victoria made a fatal mistake. In a moment of panic, she attempted to blackmail Ethan with fabricated evidence of misconduct. It was a desperate ploy, a last-ditch effort to regain control of the situation. What Victoria didn't know was that Liam had been working tirelessly to secure Ethan's digital footprint. Every email, every text message, every financial transaction, all of it was backed up and verified. Her clumsy attempt at blackmail fell flat, serving only to add another charge to the growing list of her crimes. Ethan received Victoria's blackmail attempt with a mixture of anger and satisfaction. Anger at her audacity, at the depths of her betrayal, but satisfaction, too, because this was the final piece of the puzzle. With this, they had her dead to rights. He forwarded the blackmail attempt to Agent Donovan, along with Liam's evidence proving its fabrication. Then, he sat back and waited for the hammer to fall. He didn't have to wait long. The next morning, as Ethan sipped his coffee and pretended to review blueprints at work, all hell broke loose. News alerts began popping up on his phone. Prominent businesswoman Victoria Blackwood implicated in massive fraud scheme. Con artist Xavier Reeves, a.k.a. Thornton, wanted by FBI. SEC launches investigation into Blackwood Enterprises. Ethan's colleagues gathered around the break room TV, watching in shock as Victoria's face flashed across the screen, followed by Xavier's. The newscaster's voice was hard as she detailed the charges: fraud, embezzlement, money laundering, and more. Marcus appeared at Ethan's side, his face a mask of concern. "Ethan, man, did you know about any of this?" Ethan allowed his mask to slip just a little. He let Marcus see a glimpse of the pain, the anger, the satisfaction. "I had my suspicions," he said quietly, "but I never imagined it went this deep." As his co-workers buzzed with shock and speculation, Ethan slipped away to the restroom. He locked himself in a stall, took a deep breath, and allowed himself a moment of pure, unadulterated triumph. They'd done it. The trap had sprung, and Victoria and Xavier were caught right in the middle of it. But Ethan knew better than to celebrate too early. This was just the beginning. Victoria and Xavier were cornered animals now, and there was no telling what they might do in their desperation to escape. As he splashed water on his face, steeling himself for the media frenzy that was sure to follow, Ethan made a silent vow. He would see this through to the end, no matter what it took. Victoria and Xavier had tried to destroy him. Now, they would learn the true meaning of destruction. Xavier Reeves, a.k.a. Xavier Thornton, sat in the first-class lounge of JFK International Airport, his leg bouncing nervously as he checked his watch for the 10th time in as many minutes. His eyes darted around the room, searching for any sign that his hastily laid plans were about to unravel. The burner phone in his pocket buzzed. He fished it out with trembling hands, his heart rate spiking as he read the message from his contact. FBI en route. ETA 10 minutes. Get out now. Shit, Xavier muttered, shoving the phone back in his pocket and grabbing his carry-on. He'd known the walls were closing in, but he hadn't expected them to move this fast. He should have left days ago, but the promise of one last big score had been too tempting to resist. As he strode towards the exit, a flash of red caught his eye. A breaking news cheering scrolled across the bottom of a nearby TV screen. Prominent businesswoman Victoria Blackwood implicated in massive fraud scheme. Xavier froze, his blood running cold. If they had Victoria, it was only a matter of time before she gave him up. Self-preservation had always been her strongest trait. With renewed urgency, he quickened his pace, mind racing as he formulated a new escape plan. He'd need cash, a new identity, maybe a boat to slip out of the country undetected. But first, he had to get out of this damn airport. As Xavier pushed through the revolving doors into the humid New York night, he allowed himself a moment of bitter reflection. Victoria had been a means to an end, nothing more. A convenient mark with deep pockets and useful connections. But in his haste to cut and run, he'd left her to face the music alone. It wasn't personal. It was just business. Across town, Victoria Blackwood paced the polished floors of her penthouse apartment, a glass of scotch clutched in her manicured hand. The TV blared in the background, endlessly repeating the story of her downfall. "This is impossible," she muttered, taking another gulp of the amber liquid. "I cover my tracks. We covered our tracks." But the evidence scrolling across the screen told a different story. Bank records, witness testimonies, surveillance footage. It was all there, laid bare for the world to see. Her carefully constructed facade was crumbling, and Victoria found herself facing a terrifying reality. For the first time in her life, she was truly alone. Her phone had been ringing nonstop for hours. Lawyers, business associates, so-called friends, all wanting answers she couldn't provide. She'd stopped answering after the third call, unable to bear the thinly veiled accusations and hasty distancing. As the scotch burned its way down her throat, Victoria's thoughts turned to Xavier. Where was he? Why hadn't he contacted her? A cold dread settled in her stomach as she realized the truth. He'd abandoned her, just like she'd abandoned Ethan. Ethan, the name sent a jolt through her system. In all the chaos, she'd almost forgotten about her soon-to-be ex-husband. A desperate plan began to form in her mind. If anyone could help her out of this mess, it was Ethan. He'd always been the steady one, the fixer. Surely, if she appealed to their history, the love they'd once shared. With shaking hands, Victoria reached for her phone. She scrolled through her contacts until she found Ethan's name, her thumb hovering over the call button. Taking a deep breath, she pressed it, bringing the phone to her ear. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3. Victoria. Ethan's voice was cold, devoid of any emotion. "Ethan, thank God." Victoria breathed, relief flooding her system. "I need your help. It's all falling apart, and I don't know what to do. Please, I know I hurt you, but no." The single word cut through her rambling like a knife. "What?" Victoria asked, thrown off balance by the flat refusal. "I said no, Victoria," Ethan repeated, his voice hard as steel. "You made your choices. Now you get to live with the consequences." "But Ethan, please," Victoria pleaded, desperation creeping into her voice. "We were married for 13 years. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. For a moment, Victoria dared to hope. Then Ethan spoke again, his words dripping with contempt. "It meant everything to me, Victoria. But I was just a tool to you, remember? Well, this tool is done fixing your messes. Goodbye." The line went dead, leaving Victoria staring at her phone in disbelief. She'd always prided herself on her ability to manipulate people, to bend them to her will. But Ethan had changed. The man she'd just spoken to was a stranger, cold, unyielding, and completely beyond her reach. As the reality of her situation sank in, Victoria felt the last vestiges of her composure crumble. She sank to the floor, the empty scotch glass rolling away as sobs racked her body. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. The courtroom buzzed with nervous energy as the bailiff called for order. Journalists scrambled for prime positions, their pens poised over notepads, eager to capture every detail of what promised to be the trial of the decade. At the defense table, Xavier Reeves and Victoria Blackwood sat side by side, a study in contrasts. Xavier exuded an air of casual indifference, his handsome features arranged in a mask of bored contempt. Victoria, on the other hand, was a tightly wound spring, her eyes darting nervously around the room as she smoothed non-existent wrinkles from her designer suit. As the judge entered and the court was called to session, a hush fell over the room. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, approached the bench. "Your Honor, the state calls Ethan Blackwood to the stand." A ripple of excitement passed through the spectators as Ethan made his way to the witness box. He cut an impressive figure in his tailored suit, his face a study in calm determination. As he raised his right hand to be sworn in, his eyes briefly met Victoria's. She flinched at the cold steel she saw there, quickly averting her gaze. The prosecutor began her questioning, leading Ethan through the sordid details of Victoria and Xavier's schemes. With each response, Ethan's voice grew stronger, more assured. He painted a vivid picture of betrayal, fraud, and callous disregard for the lives they'd ruined. From her seat at the defense table, Victoria watched in growing horror as Ethan systematically dismantled the life she'd built. Every lie, every manipulation, every fraudulent deal. He laid them all bare, backed by a mountain of irrefutable evidence. Xavier, for his part, maintained his facade of indifference. But those who looked closely might have noticed the slight tremor in his hands, the sheen of sweat on his upper lip. As Ethan's testimony continued, Xavier's eyes darted more and more frequently to the exits, like a cornered animal seeking escape. When it came time for cross-examination, Victoria and Xavier's high-priced defense attorney did his best to poke holes in Ethan's story. But Ethan remained unflappable, his responses measured and precise. For every attempted gotcha, Ethan had a ready answer, often supported by additional evidence that only served to further incriminate the defendants. As the defense attorney returned to his seat, defeat evident in the slump of his shoulders, the prosecutor called her next witness, Sofia Alvarez. Victoria's head snapped up at the name, her eyes widening in shock as her former business partner took the stand. Sofia's testimony was damning, providing intimate details of Victoria's fraudulent business practices and manipulative personality. "She told me it was just creative accounting," Sofia said, her voice thick with emotion. "By the time I realized the truth, it was too late. She'd set me up to take the fall if anything went wrong." As Sofia's testimony continued, Victoria felt the last threads of her defense unraveling. She leaned over to her lawyer, whispering urgently. The attorney frowned, shaking his head, but Victoria persisted. Finally, the attorney stood. "Your Honor, my client wishes to address the court." The judge raised an eyebrow but nodded his assent. Victoria stood, smoothing her skirt with trembling hands. I'd like to make a deal," she said, her voice quavering. "I have information about Xavier, about others involved in our operations. I'm willing to testify, to tell you everything I know." Xavier's head whipped around, his eyes blazing with fury. "You treacherous bitch," he snarled, lunging towards Victoria. The bailiffs rushed to restrain him as chaos erupted in the courtroom. As Xavier was dragged away, hurling threats and obscenities, Victoria locked eyes with Ethan once more. This time, she saw something flicker behind the steely exterior. Not sympathy or forgiveness, but a satisfaction. In that moment, Victoria realized the full extent of her fall. She'd lost everything: her wealth, her status, her freedom. But worst of all, she'd lost the one person who had truly loved her, and there was no going back. The sun was setting over the city skyline, painting the sky in vibrant hues of orange and pink. Ethan Blackwood stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office, a glass of champagne in hand, watching the play of light on the gleaming skyscrapers. Behind him, the sounds of celebration filled the room. Laughter, the clink of glasses, excited chatter. His team had just landed the biggest contract in the firm's history, a prestigious international project that would put them on the map in a whole new way. "There's the man of the hour." Marcus's booming voice cut through the noise as he approached, clapping Ethan on the shoulder. "How does it feel to be on top of the world, my friend?" Ethan turned, a genuine smile spreading across his face. "It feels pretty damn good, Marcus. We've come a long way." Marcus nodded, his expression growing serious for a moment. "We have indeed. There were times I wasn't sure you'd make it through after. Well, you know." Ethan's mind flashed back to those dark days after Victoria's betrayal. The struggle to keep his head above water as his personal and professional life threatened to implode. He remembered the unwavering support of friends like Marcus, the dogged determination of Olivia as she helped uncover the truth, the technical wizardry of Liam that had been instrumental in bringing Victoria and Xavier to justice. "I couldn't have done it without all of you," Ethan said, raising his glass in a toast. To friends who become family, and to new beginnings. As if on cue, Olivia appeared at his side, slipping her hand into his. "What are we toasting to?" she asked, her eyes twinkling. Ethan pulled her close, planting a soft kiss on her forehead. "To us," he said simply. "To surviving the storm and coming out stronger on the other side." Olivia's smile widened, a mix of pride and love shining in her eyes. What had started as a professional collaboration during the investigation had blossomed into something neither of them had expected. In Olivia, Ethan had found not just a partner, but a true equal. Someone who challenged him, supported him, and understood him in a way Victoria never had. As the party continued around them, Ethan found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him to this moment. The pain of betrayal, the thirst for revenge, the long nights spent building a case against those who had wronged him. It all seemed like a lifetime ago. Victoria and Xavier were serving long prison sentences, their empire of lies and fraud dismantled. The victims of their schemes, including Sofia Alvarez, had received restitution and a measure of justice. And Ethan had emerged from the crucible stronger, wiser, and more appreciative of the true riches in his life. "Penny for your thoughts?" Olivia asked, squeezing his hand gently. Ethan shook his head, chuckling softly, just thinking about how sometimes the best revenge is living well. Olivia nodded, understanding flashing in her eyes. "And are you?" "Living well, I mean." Ethan looked around the room, taking in the faces of his friends and colleagues. His gaze settled on Olivia, and he felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the champagne. "You know what?" he said, pulling her closer. "I really am." As the celebration continued into the night, Ethan allowed himself to fully embrace the moment. The past was behind him, the future bright with promise. He had weathered the storm, faced his demons, and come out the other side not just intact, but triumphant. In the end, Victoria's cruel words had proven prophetic, though not in the way she had intended. Ethan had indeed been a tool for justice, for redemption, and ultimately for his own salvation. And as he raised his glass one more time, surrounded by the people who truly mattered, Ethan Blackwood knew that he had finally found the passion, spontaneity, and excitement that had been missing from his life for far too long. The city lights twinkled below, a testament to the endless possibilities that lay ahead. And Ethan was ready to embrace them all, one triumphant step at a time. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you.
The words hit me like a freight train, their impact sending shockwaves through my body. I froze, my hand still clutching the coffee mug, knuckles turning white. Massive fraud scandal, implicated Hughes. My ears rang as I strained to make out the hushed conversation between the two surgeons huddled nearby. Hughes. Garrett Hughes, my estranged husband. Fragments of their discussion pierced through the din of the crowded conference hall lobby. Criminal charges, federal investigation, millions lost. I squeezed my eyes shut, desperately wishing it were all a cruel misunderstanding. But deep down, a gnawing sense of truth clawed at my gut. Garrett had always been cavalier with ethics, bending rules to feed his insatiable ambition as a high-flying financial analyst. I'd turned a blind eye for too long, rationalizing his moral lapses as the cost of success, until they finally shattered our marriage beyond repair. My hands trembled as I gathered my things, the pieces slowly clicking into place. The constant business trips, the hushed phone calls, the blatant lies, they all reeked of guilt and deception now. As I hurried out, dodging clusters of colleagues, fury blazed within me. How could he? After everything, did he have no conscience? No thought for the consequences? For Elise? The thought of my 16-year-old daughter stopped me in my tracks. Sweet, innocent Elise, already grappling with the pressures of teenage life. This would devastate her. I clenched my fists, resolve steadying my nerves. Not this time, Garrett. I wouldn't let you inflict more pain on our family. My heels struck the pavement with newfound purpose as I stormed out of the hotel. I had to get to the bottom of this, for Elise's sake. And God help Garrett Hughes if the whispers proved true. I burst through the door of our upscale apartment, chest heaving. Garrett looked up from the sofa, his expression a portrait of nonchalance that I'd grown to despise. Lena, I didn't expect you back so. Cut the crap, Garrett, I snarled, thunder in my voice. What the hell have you done? His brows knitted in confusion. What are you talking about? The fraud scheme. I closed the distance between us, stabbing an accusatory finger into his chest. All those hushed meetings and shady dealings. I heard everything at the conference. His mask finally shattered, dread hollowing his eyes. Who told you? I recoiled, repulsed. So it's true? You lying, depraved bastard. Garrett's complexion turned ashen. Lena, please, let me explain. But I was done listening to his lies. Explain what? How you risked our lives, our daughter's future with your crooked greed? Drawing myself up, I met his pathetic gaze with steel. You're going to come clean, Garrett. To the authorities, to our daughter, to everyone. I won't let you put us through hell again. Jaw clenched, I turned on my heel and strode out, each step fortifying my resolve. The monster of deception I'd unknowingly married was unraveling, and this time I would be the one delivering justice. I stormed back into the apartment, slamming the door behind me. Garrett was slumped on the sofa, head in his hands. He looked up at the sound, eyes bloodshot. You're back, he croaked out. Don't act so surprised, I spat. Did you really think I'd just slink away after your despicable betrayal? Garrett rose warily. Lena, please, you have no idea what I've been going through. My hands balled into fists. Oh, I think I have a damn good idea, thanks to those whispers at the conference. I never meant to. He trailed off, rubbing his temples. Things just spiraled so quickly. My temper flared. You think that's an excuse? What for I'm going to say next? You got caught up in the thrill of deception? An uneasy silence stretched between us, thick with lingering resentment. Finally, he spoke in a hoarse whisper. They're ruined, Lena. All my clients, my reputation. He met my glare with a haunted look. I'm facing financial oblivion and possibly criminal charges. In that moment, a part of me almost pitied him, the shadow of the confident, silver-tongued man I'd once loved, now reduced to this desperate husk. Almost. I stepped closer, voice dripping with venom. That's nowhere near the hell you've put our daughter and me through. Hurt flickered across his face, rapidly engulfed by shame. Good. He deserved to drown in it. My mind raced back to that night years ago, the fateful argument that shattered our marriage vows. Uncovered lies about money, infidelity, broken promises. I'd wept until I could cry no more. And through it all, Garrett remained coldly indifferent, consumed by greed and carnal desires. That night, I vowed our daughter Elise would never have to suffer the anguish I did over her father's moral failings. But now here I stood. The old wounds reopened and bleeding anew. White-hot rage roiled in my chest like lava. When were you planning to tell me, Garrett? Or Elise? I hissed through gritted teeth. He grimaced like a cornered rat. I don't know. I thought I could fix this before. My palm whipped across his cheek with a resounding crack. Garrett reeled back, stunned. Don't you dare invoke our daughter's name with your wretched lies, I snarled. Not after you jeopardized everything we have, everything I sacrificed my career for. I loomed over him, trembling with fury. She worships you, Garrett. How could you put her through such anguish again? Shame and guilt contorted his features, but I felt no sympathy, just disgust at his moral cowardice. He was the personification of every fear that kept me up at night, dreading the day his deceit resurfaced to torment our little girl. Suddenly, Garrett seemed to crumple under my withering glare. I watched impassively as he sank onto the couch, burying his face in his hands, shoulders heaving. I stood rooted for a long moment, then turned and strode out without a backwards glance. The first tears streamed down my cheeks as the magnitude of his latest betrayal hit home. I would protect Elise, no matter what inner demons I had to confront from our shattered past. I found Elise hunched over her laptop at the kitchen counter, fingers furiously tapping away. Her brow furrowed in concentration as she navigated the storm of teenage life. "Hi, honey," I said gently, not wanting to startle her. "Everything okay?" Elise looked up with a weary smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Hey, Mom. Yeah, just working on this stupid group project." I winced inwardly at her haggard expression, the telltale signs of adolescent stress etched into her young features. If only I could shield her from such burdens. Fighting the urge to pull her into a warm embrace, I gestured to the laptop screen. "What's the project about?" "Environmental science," she sighed, rubbing her temples. "We're analyzing the ecological impacts of commercial farming, but my partners keep blowing off meetings and missing deadlines." My heart ached to see her so overwhelmed. Elise had always been a diligent student, meticulously completing assignments well before they were due. But these past few months, the workload seemed to be taking a heavy toll. "I'm so sorry, Elle. That's really unfair to you." She shrugged listlessly. "It's whatever. I'm used to carrying the load at this point." Those words cut deep, a brutal reminder that once again I'd failed to protect her from unnecessary hardship. Just like that night years ago when she overheard Garrett and I screaming at each other. Swallowing hard, I forced a reassuring smile. "Why don't you take a break? We could watch a movie. Just the two of us." Elise hesitated, chewing her lip in that adorably pensive way she had since childhood. Finally, she spoke in a small voice that shattered my heart anew. Have you noticed people have been treating me differently lately?" My breath caught in my throat as she continued. "It's like they go out of their way to exclude me, whispering behind my back." She hugged her arms, suddenly looking so small and vulnerable. Did I do something wrong, Mom?" White-hot anger flared within me, aimed directly at the monstrous coward who'd brought such misery into our lives. I wanted nothing more than to rush over and enfold Elise in my arms, shielding her from this fresh betrayal. But I knew I couldn't. Not yet. Couldn't risk tainting her innocence before I fully grasped the serpentine depths of her father's transgressions. Suppressing my rage, I crossed over and placed my hands on her slender shoulders. "Listen to me, Elise," I said firmly. "You are the most kind-hearted, brilliant young woman I know, and anyone who treats you with anything less than respect doesn't deserve a second of your time or energy." She gazed up at me with those soulful eyes, silently pleading for reassurance and guidance. In that moment, I yearned to lay bare the sordid truth haunting our family once more. But I held my tongue, forcing a warm smile instead. "Trust me, honey, you haven't done anything wrong. Those people are just small-minded and intimidated by your spirit." I gently brushed a tendril of hair from her face. Bullies always lash out at the strong, the special ones who shine too brightly. Slowly, the tension drained from Elise's posture, her eyes regaining a spark of their familiar radiant self. "Thanks, Mom," she murmured, managing a small smile. I really needed to hear that." As she turned back to her work, I could no longer suppress the storm of conflicted emotions roiling within. Garrett would be made to answer for every one of Elise's tears, every shred of hardship he'd callously inflicted. My titanic quest for justice had only just begun. The next morning, I strode into my office at Mercy General with a renewed sense of purpose burning in my chest. I had to get to the bottom of Garrett's tangled web before it collapsed on our family. Sinking into my desk chair, I pulled up his name on my computer, grimly scanning the search results. Article after damning article detailed a shocking saga of fraud, deception, and shattered lives. Multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme, offshore accounts, disgraced hedge fund manager. My stomach twisted as I read about investors and retirees left destitute, life savings siphoned away by Garrett's unquenchable greed. How could he have been so heartlessly reckless, so morally bankrupt? One particularly lurid piece caught my eye. An exposé from a local paper written by a journalist named Alexis Harmon. I vaguely recalled her as an up-and-coming reporter known for her uncompromising pursuit of the truth. Perhaps she could help unravel this sordid tangle. I quickly jotted down her contact details. resolving to reach out shortly. But first, one other avenue required exploring. I leaned back, worrying my lower lip as I typed out a familiar name, Malcolm Brooks. One of Garrett's closest colleagues during his heyday on Wall Street, Brooks had been disgraced a few years back in an insider trading scandal. He and Garrett had been thick as thieves until Brooks landed in prison while Garrett escaped culpability through dumb luck and clever maneuvering. If anyone had insight into the depravity Garrett was capable of, it was Malcolm. A short while later, my phone buzzed with a New York area code. Taking a steadying breath, I accepted the call. Malcolm Brooks speaking. Mr. Brooks, I said evenly. This is Lena Barkley, Garrett Hughes' wife. A momentary silence crackled over the line before he responded, surprise tinging his gruff tone. Well, isn't this a blast from the past? To what do I owe the pleasure, Mrs. Barkley? I paused, weighing my words carefully. I think you know exactly why I'm calling. Another beat of silence before a low, bitter chuckle. So you finally caught a glimpse of that worm's true colors, did you? Can't say I'm surprised. Garrett Hughes was always 2 shakes away from an ethical freefall. My breath caught in my throat at his venom-laced words, the pieces falling into sickening clarity. All those years ago, beneath my willful ignorance, I must have sensed Garrett's capacity for such monumental betrayal. That's what poisoned our relationship, our family, from the very start. I swallowed hard against the lump of guilt burning in my throat. Mr. Brooks, I need your help to undo the damage he's caused, for my daughter's sake. Walk me through everything you know. He made a low, scoffing noise. Of course, wouldn't want little Garrett Jr. growing up with Daddy's stench all over her. His cruel words lanced straight through me like jagged shards of ice, but I gritted my teeth, forcing my voice to remain steady. Please, Malcolm, I understand if you hate Garrett, but don't take that out on my child. She's completely innocent in all this. A tense pause stretched between us before he finally sighed, relenting. You're right. I apologize. That was uncalled for. I leaned forward, clutching the phone tightly. So you'll help me bring him down before anyone else gets hurt? Another weighted pause before he muttered. Yeah, I'll help you burn that snake straight to the ground. Spine ramrod straight, I listened with cold determination as Malcolm laid bare the full, sickening scope of Garrett's depravity. Breached ethics, illegal trades, hollowed out companies, and ruined lives littering his path like grisly roadkill. A white-hot mixture of rage, disgust, and bone-deep determination blazed within me by the time he finished. Garrett had hurt so many people, stolen their futures and sense of security through cold, calculated avarice. But I would be damned if he stole those things from Elise and me again. No more lies, no more running, no more hollow excuses. The time for my husband's reckoning had finally come. And I would be standing watch, clear-eyed and uncompromising when the hammer fell. You can't be serious, Mom. Elise gaped at me, eyes wide with a mixture of shock and hurt. I steeled myself, fighting to keep my expression neutral. I'm afraid I am, honey. I reached across the kitchen table, gently grasping her hand. This is the only way to stop your father from inflicting more damage. She yanked her hand back, shaking her head vehemently. But going public like that? Dragging his name through the mud? He did this to himself, Elise. I fought to keep my voice steady against the growing tide of anguish welling within me. Your father's greed and selfishness put us in this position, not me. Elise shot up from her chair, whirling away with her arms hugged tightly across her chest, the universal gesture of wounded vulnerability. You always saw the worst in him, even when he was trying his best. Maybe that's why he felt like he couldn't come to us. The accusations sliced deep, dredging up years of unresolved guilt over the disintegration of our family unit. My fists clenched at my sides as I struggled against the urge to snap back in volatile defensiveness. This wasn't about me and Garrett. It was about protecting our daughter from being collateral damage in his crusade of lies. Drawing a steadying breath, I rose and crossed over to where she stood, trembling with her back towards me. Elise, look at me. I pitched my voice in that soft maternal tone that never failed to soothe her troubles as a child. You need to understand how dangerously far your father has gone this time. Slowly, achingly, she turned to face me, eyes glistening, lip quivering in a valiant struggle to maintain her composure. All those people he's hurt, the lives he's ruined. I fought against the lump swelling in my own throat. If I don't stop him now, we could lose everything. Our home, your college fund, my practice, everything we've worked so hard to build. A lone teardrop traced down Elise's porcelain cheek as the gravity of my words sank in. Wordlessly, I pulled her into a fierce embrace, cradling her head against my chest while she shuddered with muffled sobs. We stayed like that for countless moments, mother and daughter united against the maelstrom threatening to rip our family asunder once more. At last, Elise drew back, sniffling as she swiped at her damp cheeks. Her eyes still shone with unspeakable hurt, but now reflected a glimmer of dawning resolution. "Okay," she said in a small but steady voice. "If this is the only way to make Dad face the truth, I'm in." A fragile sense of hope bloomed in my chest, quickly tempered by lingering dread. "I wish there was another way, Elise. Truly I do. But your father crossed a line this time that can't be ignored or undone." Marshalling my own inner reserves of courage, I drew myself up to my full height. "We're going to work closely with my contacts, a tenacious reporter and one of your father's most embittered former colleagues. Together, we're going to systematically unravel and expose every sordid thread of his fraud to the public." Elise's expression hardened with grim determination, aging her well beyond her 16 years. "Then let's get to work on bringing Dad's crimes to light," she said in a steely tone that would have made me proud under any other circumstances. "No more lies. No more protecting the Garrett Hughes everyone thinks they know." She extended her hand in a symbolic gesture of familial solidarity. It's time he faced the consequences for who he really is. Our eyes locked, two affronted warriors bound by unbreakable blood and shared betrayal, vowing to settle an overdue personal reckoning. Squaring my shoulders, I grasped her hand in an unbreakable filial vice. Agreed. It's finally time for the world to meet the real Garrett Hughes. And on that fateful day, the wheels of my husband's inevitable downfall were finally set into irreversible motion. The rhythmic tapping of my foot matched the pounding of my pulse as I sat tensely watching the clock. Any minute now, Alexis Harmon's blistering exposé on Garrett's crimes would go live on the Hartford Chronicle's website. Elise shifted next to me on the sofa, her own restless energy bleeding through. A myriad of emotions flickered across her face: anger, sadness, trepidation. My heart ached to see the loss of her youthful innocence playing out so vividly. Squeezing her hand, I gave what I hoped was a reassuring smile. "It's going to be okay, honey?" She managed a wan nod, lips pressed into a grim line. Her phone buzzed, and she quickly silenced it, no doubt responding to yet another concerned message from a friend who'd inevitably seen the firestorm brewing on social media. Suddenly, my own phone rang, the call I'd been bracing for. Drawing a fortifying breath, I accepted and brought it to my ear. "It's done." Alexis Harmon's crisp voice sounded tinny but resolute. "The article just went live, complete with that paper trail from your source detailing every sordid dime Garrett pocketed illegally over the years." "Thank you, Alexis," I said, squeezing Elise's hand tighter. "You have no idea how much this means to us." "Don't thank me yet," she replied grimly. "This is just the opening salvo. Brace yourselves. Garrett's world is about to go nuclear." No sooner had she spoken than my laptop pinged with a new email notification. The subject line alone was enough to drain my face of all remaining color. Disgraced money manager Garrett Hughes orchestrated a $120 million Ponzi scheme. I drew a shuddering breath as the damning article's contents filled the screen. A masterfully crafted tapestry of cold, irrefutable facts meticulously unraveling my husband's litany of securities fraud, embezzlement, and brazen deception. Elise peered over, hand flying to muffle a horrified gasp as she digested the sheer enormity of Garrett's treachery. Of how his unchecked avarice had defrauded innocent pensioners of their life savings and irreparably shattered the finances of countless households, all while he lived in unrepentant opulence, utterly devoid of conscience. "Oh my God," she choked out, hot tears spilling down her cheeks. "All those people, how could he?" My own grief and revulsion warred with a perverse sense of grim vindication. For far too long, Garrett's fortress of lies had tainted and contaminated those he claimed to love most. Now, at long last, the floodgates had finally burst open, a searing light shining upon the bottomless pit of deceit and moral bankruptcy he'd chosen to wallow in. Clutching my daughter's trembling form, I could only watch numbly as the first furious reactions began rolling in. Outraged tweets and Facebook rants from defrauded victims and scandalized observers alike. One particularly visceral comment seared itself into my memory. Garrett Hughes is a vile, avaricious monster who deserves to rot in jail for the rest of his miserable life. Far from objecting, I found myself silently agreeing. How could I not, after laying my eyes upon the full, grotesque tapestry of my husband's perfidy? The shattered futures, ruined families, and trail of lives callously discarded in his rapacious wake. For so long, I deluded myself into believing I could redeem the shadowed remnants of the man I once loved. That faint glimmers of decency still resided within Garrett's withered soul. But confronted with such nightmarish evidence of his depravity, I realized I'd been clinging to a fantasy, a desperate mirage of the husband and father he should have been. The truth was more brutal, more horrifically absolute. Garrett Hughes was a pathological con man without a shred of empathy or remorse, and he needed to be stopped before his poison seeped into any more innocent lives. The reckoning was nigh. As the first bombshell detonated across the mediascape, I could only steel my resolve for the seismic upheavals still to come. No more turning away, no more deluding myself about second chances, only hard truths and the personal justice I'd fought so hard to deliver. The pounding on the front door echoed through the apartment like a judge's gavel. Elise and I exchanged a loaded glance, her eyes still rimmed with red from the night's endless tears. "Stay here," I murmured, rising to my feet on legs that trembled ever so slightly. With a fortifying breath, I crossed over and pulled open the door. Two grim-faced U.S. Marshals stood on the other side, badges glinting in the dim hallway light. "Mrs. Lena Barkley?" the taller one asked in a flat, no-nonsense tone. I lifted my chin, anger and vindication warring within me. "That's me. I assume you're here about my husband, Garrett Hughes?" "We have a federal warrant for his arrest," the second marshal stated, brandishing a sheaf of papers. "Our sources indicate he was last seen at this residence. Where is he?" An icy chill lanced through me, not of fear, but of sheer disgust that Garrett would potentially use our home as a refuge after his sickening criminal acts were laid bare. Grinding my teeth, I jerked my head towards the hallway. "See for yourselves." The two men brushed past me, fanning out with practiced efficiency. One whistled sharply as they entered the living area, his partner quickly taking up a defensive stance. "Target sighted." I followed their gaze to the corner of the room, and felt a swell of revulsion crest within me. There sat the disgraced shadow of my husband, slumped against the wall in his silk bathrobe and stained undershirt, an open bottle of gin clutched in his trembling hands. Garrett squinted blearily up at the approaching marshals, a pathetic, disheveled mockery of the suave, confident operator he'd once fancied himself. As they hauled him to his feet, the unmistakable reek of sour booze and failure assaulted my nostrils. "Garrett William Hughes," the first marshal barked, slapping cuffs around his limp wrists. "You are under arrest for securities fraud, embezzlement, and grand larceny charges. You have the right to remain silent." Elise emerged from the hallway, eyes blazing with equal parts loathing and raw hurt as she took in her fallen father's pathetic state. "Mom," she whispered from the corner of her mouth, sounding almost childlike. "Was this really necessary, parading him out like some common criminal?" Another wave of anger swelled in my breast, this one tinged with protectiveness over my daughter's lingering innocence. With 3 long strides, I crossed over to stand mere inches from Garrett's sagging, swaying form. "Look at her," I spat, jabbing a finger towards Elise's stricken face. "Look at the anguish you've put this beautiful girl through, you selfish bastard." His head lolled up, bloodshot eyes struggling to focus on our enraged features. "Lilina? Elise? I?" "Save it, Garrett," I snarled, revolted by his meager attempt at drunken contrition. "We don't want to hear any more of your lies." Elise stepped forward then, every ounce of her petite frame radiating white-hot fury. "Do you have any idea how many people's lives you destroyed, all for a bigger penthouse and sports cars?" Her voice dripped with caustic venom. "You're a pathetically greedy, soulless husk of a human being." Garrett recoiled as if struck, the haze of inebriation doing nothing to mask the spasm of naked shame contorting his features. but it wasn't remotely enough to temper the flames of disgust consuming me from the inside out. "You're right, Elise," I seethed, unable to tear my disgusted glare from his slack, pitiful visage. "He doesn't deserve a single ounce more of our anguish or tears." Straightening my spine, I fixed him with eyes of purest ice. "Take him away, officers, and if I never have to lay eyes on this wretched, morally bankrupt husk again, it'll be too soon." Yet as the marshals wrestled the handcuffed Garrett towards the door, our splintered family's legacy of generational trauma festered in the air between us, like an open wound. Gathering Elise into a protective embrace, I watched with a heady swirl of sadness, rage, and grim resolve as my husband was hauled away towards the harsh judgment he'd so ruthlessly courted. There would be no more lies, no more hollow platitudes, or desperate 11th-hour appeals for forgiveness. Only the cold and bitter fruit born of his voracious avarice. As the door swung shut behind Garrett Hughes, severing him from our lives forever, a solitary thought echoed through my mind. Justice, long overdue, had finally been served. 6 months later, the morning sun filtered through the kitchen window, bathing the room in a warm, rejuvenating glow. I sipped my coffee, savoring the rich aroma and tranquil silence. So much had changed, yet it felt like lifting a crushing weight from my shoulders. The financial fallout from Garrett's crimes had been severe. Between the court-ordered restitutions and legal fees, our prosperous lifestyle quickly became a memory. But I didn't lament its passing, not when I finally felt liberated from his toxic legacy. Elise's footsteps padded into the kitchen, shattering the fragile quiet. Her eyes were puffy from another night of processing the seismic shifts in our lives. But a small, peaceful smile tugged at the corners of her mouth. "Morning, Mom." I returned the smile, chest swelling with maternal pride. "Good morning, sweetheart." Gesturing to the stack of college brochures scattered across the table, I arched an eyebrow. "Anything catching your eye?" Elise sank into the chair opposite me, worrying her lower lip in that familiar pensive way. "A few possibilities. The scholarship money definitely helps expand my options." My heart clenched, guilt rapidly dousing the warm glow. If not for Garrett's catastrophic greed, Elise's application process wouldn't be weighed down by such pragmatism. "Honey, I'm so sorry you even have to worry about." "Stop," she cut me off firmly, that fierce spark shining through once more. "What's done is done, remember? We're not going to keep torturing ourselves over Dad's mistakes." I blinked, caught off guard by her adamant maturity. When had my little girl grown into such a resilient, self-possessed young woman? Reaching across the table, I gave her hand an affectionate squeeze. "You're right. We've finally exorcised that demon from our lives. No more looking back." Elise squeezed back, her warm smile broadening. "Exactly. We've got a fresh start ahead. Just you and me, Mom. Like it's always been." My breath hitched at the swell of emotions rushing through me. She was right. Through all the tumult and betrayal, our bond had remained unbreakable, an indomitable constant. No matter how deeply Garrett's deceit had burrowed, he could never extinguish the profound, unconditional love between a mother and her daughter. Nodding fiercely, I blinked back nascent tears of gratitude and release. "You and me against the world, kiddo. Always and forever." Elise's radiant smile was all the assurance I needed that we'd persevere, stronger, wiser, and steeled against any future maelstroms life might hurl our way. Because that unshakable foundation of love and trust was one pillar Garrett Hughes could never hope to crumble, no matter how greedily he indulged his worst impulses. With a contented sigh, I rose and began gathering our dishes, basking in the tender domestic ritual. The path ahead was rife with challenges, to be sure, but also brimming with possibilities neither of us could scarcely imagine yet. One thing was certain. The shackles of lies and moral cowardice had finally been shattered. Elise and I were free to author our own story on our own unbending terms. A sudden notification from my laptop caught my eye. I moved over and felt my eyebrows climb as the latest breaking news headline flashed across the screen. Disgraced money manager Garrett Hughes sentenced to 25 years in federal prison for orchestrating $120 million Ponzi scheme. A heaviness seemed to lift from my very soul as the words sank in. At long last, the ultimate cosmic arbitration had been delivered. Garrett's insidious misdeeds would no longer corrupt and metastasize in the shadows. He alone would answer for the countless lives he'd callously upended in pursuit of ill-gotten fortunes. Poetic justice, whether he was spiritually capable of appreciating it or not. Elise peered over my shoulder at the screen, her unburdened expression hardening into one of cool stoicism. Without a word, she reached past me and emphatically closed the laptop, shutting out her father's sins like a swiftly banished ghost. Our eyes met, shining with mutual catharsis. Betrayal and trauma had bent but not broken us. If anything, the lacerating trials had galvanized our resilience into an indestructible foundation to build anew. As a fresh wave of morning sunlight washed over us, I made a silent vow to ensure the remaining years of Elise's childhood would be swaddled in unconditional warmth, wisdom, and renewed family bonds. Crossing the space between us, I pulled my daughter into a fierce, lingering embrace. When we at last parted, our faces reflected brilliant mirrors of steadfast love and hope for the future shimmering just over the horizon. For while Garrett Hughes's karmic path ended in a prison cell, ours continued to hell. Ever onward, uplifting, inspiring, and blazing towards brilliant new horizons of our own authoring.
I never imagined I'd find the courage to escape, but here I was, sneaking through the dark hallway of my parents' house. My name is Scarlett, and for 20 years, my parents had made my life a living hell. I pulled my threadbare coat tighter around me, my eyes darting back and forth, making sure they were still asleep. Every step I took was calculated, careful not to put too much weight on the creaky floorboards. I knew all too well what would happen if I woke them. The scars on my arms, hidden beneath my long sleeves, were a constant reminder of their anger. As I reached the kitchen, my stomach growled painfully. I grabbed the bowl of oatmeal I had hidden in the back of the fridge for this very moment. My parents kept all the good food locked away where I couldn't reach it. I knew I needed to be smart about this. The food would have to last until I was far away from here. With the bowl of oatmeal safely tucked into my bag, I made my way to the front door. As I carefully turned the key, I heard a creak from my parents' bedroom. My heart nearly stopped when I heard my father call out my name. Sometimes he talked in his sleep. I prayed this was one of those times. I stood frozen, barely breathing, knowing that if he caught me trying to escape, the beating would be worse than ever. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, I finally opened the door and slipped out into the night. The cool air hit my face, and for a moment, I felt a surge of hope. At 20 years old, I'd never been allowed to study or learn anything. All I wanted was to work, to earn enough money to never go hungry again. But as I stepped onto the street, my plans came to a sudden halt. There, leaning against the cold brick wall of an alley, was a man who looked even worse off than me. He was thin, his lank hair framing a face that, despite the dirt, still held traces of remarkable beauty. The man looked up, surprise flickering in his eyes as he realized I was actually acknowledging his existence. My heart ached for him. How many people must walk by every day, pretending not to see him? I hesitated, my carefully laid plans crumbling in the face of this man's obvious suffering. As bad as things were for me at home, at least I got one meal a day. This man probably hadn't eaten in who knows how long. Before I knew what I was doing, I found myself walking towards him, the bowl of oatmeal still in my hands. "I don't know your name," I said softly, "but you look like you need this more than I do." I held out the bowl, watching as the dim streetlight illuminated the gratitude in his eyes. "Stephen," he said, his hands shaking as he took the bowl. "My name is Stephen, and you must be Scarlett." I felt a jolt of fear run through me. "How do you know my name?" I asked, unable to keep the suspicion out of my voice. Stephen looked at me for a moment before answering. "I heard someone saying your name earlier when I was passing by." He looked down at the bowl in his hands. "Why are you doing this for me?" His voice was hoarse, filled with the distrust of someone who had little reason to expect kindness from the world. I glanced around, making sure the night still cloaked us in darkness and silence. "Because I know what it's like to be hungry," I confessed in a low voice. The admission felt both freeing and like a new burden. I can't just leave you here alone when I know you need help." Stephen studied me with new eyes, a faint curve touching the corner of his mouth. In that moment, standing there with this stranger, I felt a connection I had never experienced before. For the first time in my life, I had chosen to help someone else, even at the cost of my own plans, and somehow, that choice made me feel stronger than I ever had before. I never thought I'd find myself in this situation, sharing a meager bowl of oatmeal with a homeless man in a dilapidated shed. But here I was, sitting next to Stephen, both of us warmed by the steam rising from the bowl between us. You should eat more," Stephen insisted, pushing the spoon toward me. "You look hungry." I shook my head, even as my stomach growled traitorously. "I've already eaten," I lied, not wanting him to worry. "Besides, you need it more than I do." The truth was, I was starving. My mother's slap still stung on my cheek, a harsh reminder of the price I paid if caught sneaking extra food. But seeing the relief on Stephen's face as he took his first bite made it all worth it. "I can't promise much," I told him, "but I'll help you as much as I can." The determination in my voice surprised even me. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was making a real difference, even if it was just for one person. Stephen looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and admiration. "You can't save the world, you know," he said gently. I felt a strength growing inside me as I replied, "Maybe not, but I can try to make a difference where it matters." I pointed to the shed at the far end of the street. "It isn't much, but I know my parents never go there. You can stay there, at least for tonight," I offered. "It's too cold out here. I feel terrible if you froze by morning." Stephen nodded and followed me to the shed. As he settled in, placing the bowl on a makeshift surface, he turned to me with a sad smile. "You've got a good heart, young lady, too good for this cruel world." His words hit me hard, and I felt the irony of my situation wash over me. "I'm just trying to be the person my parents never were," I said softly, turning to leave. The urge to run away was still pulsing through my veins, but I knew I couldn't leave Stephen here alone and hungry. "Take care, Stephen," I whispered. "If you need anything else, I'll do my best to help." As I left the shed, I made a decision. I would stay at my parents' house a little longer, at least until Stephen was well-fed and strong enough to fend for himself. Then I promised myself I would make my escape. The next morning, I snuck into the kitchen before my parents woke up. My hands shook as I prepared breakfast, making a little extra. "If I do this every day, they won't notice the difference," I muttered to myself as I stirred the oatmeal. But as I was spooning the extra portion into a container, I heard my mother's footsteps on the stairs. My heart raced, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Good morning, Mom," I said with a fake smile. "I made a little extra breakfast for you both today." My mother eyed me suspiciously. "Food is expensive," she snapped. "You eat too much." Before I could react, her hand flew out, striking me across the face. "This is to teach you not to waste," she hissed. "You won't eat anything more today." I fought back tears as she snatched the bowl away from me after just 3 bites. But I knew I had to be careful. If they caught on to what I was doing, the consequences would be severe. As soon as I had the chance, I grabbed the hidden container and slipped out the back door. Every step felt heavy with the weight of responsibility. My cheeks still stung from my mother's slap, but I pressed on. Stephen needed me. When I reached the shed, I found Stephen still asleep, curled up in the corner for warmth. "Stephen, wake up," I whispered, gently touching his shoulder. "I brought you some food." He stirred slowly, looking at me with a mix of gratitude and disbelief. "You really came back," he said, his voice hoarse. As we sat there, sharing the warm oatmeal, I felt a connection I had never experienced before. For the first time in my life, I was doing something that truly mattered. Despite the risks, despite the fear, I knew I would keep coming back for as long as Stephen needed me. I never thought I'd be sharing a meager bowl of oatmeal with a homeless man. But here I was, watching Stephen eat slowly, life seemingly returning to his eyes. He insisted I eat half before he would take a bite himself. His kindness, despite his desperate situation, touched my heart in ways I couldn't explain. "You're different from the others, Scarlett," Stephen said softly. "Most people just ignore me, but you have a heart this cruel world couldn't break." I smiled sadly, feeling a mix of pride and sorrow. "Maybe," I replied, "but there's still so much to do." I knew this small act of kindness wasn't enough to completely change Stephen's situation, but it was a start, a glimmer of hope in a world that often seemed devoid of it. As I made my way back home, my mind was already racing with plans to secure more food without raising suspicion. I was determined not to let my parents' cruelty define who I was or the impact I could have on the world around me. The rest of the day passed in a blur of menial chores, as it always did. By evening, I was exhausted, but when I entered my room, the sight of a covered dish on a silver tray jolted me awake. Lifting the cover, I gasped. It was a meal fit for a dream. Fruits, vegetables, meat, even a small dessert cup. Foods I rarely, if ever, got to taste. Did Mom feel guilty about hitting me this morning? I wondered as I savored each bite. The nutritious meal made me feel stronger, healthier than I had in ages. The next morning, however, reality hit hard. The cold was becoming overwhelming as winter approached rapidly. As I made my way to the shed with Stephen's oatmeal, my breath was visible in the frigid air. I realized he would need more than just food to survive. When I found Stephen shivering under his thin blanket, which barely retained any warmth, I knew I had to act. "You need more than this to stay warm," I murmured, feeling helpless but determined to help. That afternoon, while my parents were out, I searched the attic for unused clothes and blankets. Each item I put in the bag increased my anxiety. If they noticed these things missing, I'd be in for it. "They can't realize these are gone," I thought, carefully collecting items they hadn't used in years. With the heavy bag on my shoulder, I ran to the shed under the cover of darkness. Each step was a calculated risk. I opened the door slowly, finding Stephen huddled in the corner. "I brought you something," I whispered, setting the bag down in anxious silence. Stephen's eyes lit up as he peered inside. "Don't worry about it," I said, forcing a smile, even as my heart raced with the fear of discovery. "Just use them to keep warm, okay?" Stephen took my hand, his cold fingers intertwining with mine. "Scarlett, you do so much for me. Why do you go to all this trouble?" The intensity of his gaze deepened the question. I looked at our joined hands, finding an answer that felt true to my core. "Because if I were in your place, I'd hope someone would do the same for me," I confessed, feeling a mix of fear and determination. "I'll never forget this, Scarlett." "Never," Stephen said, squeezing my hand. I nodded, feeling a wave of warmth against the cold that had nothing to do with clothes or blankets. It was the warmth of the bond forming between us, a connection of gratitude and mutual care. As I made my way back home, tension built inside me. What if my parents discovered what I'd done? Each step towards the house increased my fear. The moon was hidden behind dark clouds, and the wind blew colder, as if foreshadowing trouble. But I knew, no matter what happened, I couldn't stop now. Stephen needed me, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was truly making a difference. I never thought I'd be sneaking out of my own house in the middle of the night, but here I was, calculating the height of the drop from my bedroom window. The snow was falling silently outside, each flake a reminder of the bitter cold that Stephen was enduring in that rickety shed. I knew every second counted now as I whispered a quick prayer, asking God to protect me from injury and to keep Stephen safe. I couldn't help but feel a mix of fear and determination coursing through my veins. "Stephen needs me," I reminded myself as I gathered the courage to jump. The impact of hitting the ground knocked the wind out of me, but miraculously I was unharmed. Whether it was divine intervention or sheer luck, I didn't have time to ponder. I raced towards the shed, my heart pounding with each step. What I found inside shook me to my core. Stephen was pale and delirious, his breathing labored and painful. As I knelt beside him, he whispered between coughs that he didn't think he'd last much longer. Each word seemed to cost him tremendous effort. Despair washed over me, but I forced it down. "Don't say that, Stephen," I said, trying to inject hope into my voice, even as fear clawed at my insides. "I brought medicine and a warm blanket. You're going to be fine." Stephen's hand found mine, his grip weak but insistent. A faint smile played on his lips as he called me an angel, thanking me for not leaving him alone. The gratitude in his fading voice nearly broke me. As I helped him take the medicine, I could feel hot tears threatening to spill from my eyes. "You have to fight, Stephen," I insisted, my voice cracking with emotion. "I'm here with you." The thought of losing him, of him dying alone and forgotten in this cold shed, was overwhelming. "Stay with me," I pleaded, offering up silent prayers for his recovery. I spent the next hour by his side, my mind racing with what to do next. I knew I couldn't leave him like this, but I also knew my absence would soon be discovered at home. Just a few hours earlier, I had barely avoided disaster when my parents returned home unexpectedly. I had managed to sneak back in through the back door, but their suspicion was palpable. "Where is that girl?" My mother's voice had cut through the air like a knife. I had frozen in place, my heart threatening to burst out of my chest. Quickly hiding the empty bag under a piece of furniture in the laundry room, I had rushed to the kitchen, trying to appear as natural as possible. "I'm your mom," I had called out, fighting to keep the tremor out of my voice. Just finishing up in the kitchen. My mother had entered the room, eyeing me with distrust. "You've been outside, haven't you?" she had accused, her eyes narrowing. A chill had run down my spine, but I had lied, praying my internal panic wasn't visible on my face. "No, Mom, I've been here the whole time." "Don't lie to me," she had snapped. "Your father saw footprints in the snow leading to the shed." Her tone had been pure menace. "You know what happens to lying girls, don't you?" I had swallowed hard, my stomach churning with dread. Thinking quickly, I had concocted a story about checking on the tools in the shed because of the forecasted storm. My parents had exchanged glances, clearly not buying it. "Let's hope that's true," my father had said as he entered the kitchen. "But we're watching you." They had locked me in my room after that, the key safely in my mother's possession. As I sat there, feeling more like a prisoner than ever in my own home, my worry for Stephen had grown with each passing minute. Now, as I sat with him in the shed, I knew I had to find a way to get him real help, no matter the consequences. The storm was getting worse, and Stephen's condition was deteriorating rapidly. I couldn't let him die here, not when I had the power to do something about it. With renewed determination, I squeezed Stephen's hand. "Hold on," I whispered. "I'm going to get you out of here. Just hold on a little longer." As I said the words, I realized I had no idea how I was going to accomplish this, but I knew with every fiber of my being that I had to try. I never thought I'd be risking everything for a stranger, but here I was, shivering in the cold shed, watching as Stephen's color slowly returned to normal. As our eyes met, I was struck by how handsome he was, even in his weakened state. He must have noticed something in my gaze because he smiled at me, declaring that I was his salvation. My heart swelled with a mixture of pride and fear. I knew I couldn't leave him here another night, but sneaking him into my house seemed impossible. Still, I had to try. "I'm going to find a way to get you somewhere warmer," I told him, trying to inject confidence into my voice. As I made my way back home, my mind raced with possibilities and potential disasters. But nothing could have prepared me for what awaited me. My mother was standing there, holding an empty medicine wrapper I had carelessly left behind. Her voice dripped with venom as she demanded an explanation. I felt the blood drain from my face as I stammered out a weak excuse about feeling ill, but she wasn't buying it. She cut me off, her face inches from mine, her eyes blazing with anger. She knew I had been out. She wanted to know who I had been meeting, what I was hiding. My heart pounded so hard, I was sure she could hear it. I knew that one wrong word could mean disaster, not just for me, but for Stephen too. If I was locked up again, he would be left alone in the cold, possibly to die. The thought made me feel sick. "There's no one, Mom, I swear," I lied, fighting to keep my voice steady. But she was determined to find out the truth. She grabbed my arm, practically dragging me towards the shed. Each step felt like lead, my heart pounding like a warning bell. To my immense relief and confusion, the shed was empty when we arrived. But as my mother pulled me back towards the house, threatening that this wasn't over, my mind spun with worry. Where had Stephen gone? Was he okay? That night was one of the longest of my life. I tossed and turned, my mind conjuring up horrible scenarios. What if Stephen had gotten worse and wandered off looking for help? What if he had died alone in the cold? By dawn, I was burning with fever, my chest aching with each breath, but I knew I couldn't give in to illness now. Stephen needed me. Wrapping myself in the thickest coat I could find, I waited for my chance to escape again. When I finally made it back to the shed, clutching a pot of warm soup and more medicine, I was nearly delirious with fever. "Stephen," I called softly, my voice barely above a whisper. The relief I felt when I saw him still there, alive, was overwhelming. He looked at me with concern, noticing my pale, shaking form. I tried to smile as I handed him the soup and medicine, insisting I was fine, but as I sat beside him, I could feel my strength ebbing away. "It's okay, Stephen, we both need this," I said, my voice trailing off. His weakness mirrored mine as I struggled to make my way home through the darkness and cold. I realized I might have pushed myself too far this time, but looking at Stephen, I knew I'd do it all again in a heartbeat. Sometimes, doing the right thing means taking risks, and for Stephen, I was willing to risk everything. I never thought I'd find myself in such a desperate situation, collapsed in the snow, my consciousness fading away. The world had started to spin dangerously, and before I knew it, I was on the ground, the cold seeping into my bones. I don't know how long I lay there, but the next thing I remember is waking up in the shed, wrapped in every blanket Stephen could find. As my eyes fluttered open, I saw Stephen's worried face hovering over me. He told me he had risked coming out of the shed to check on me and had found me unconscious in the snow. Despite his own weakness, he had somehow managed to carry me back to safety. "You've saved my life so many times, Scarlett," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Now it's my turn to take care of you." I felt a warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the blankets. As Stephen tended to me through the night, I drifted in and out of consciousness. In my more lucid moments, I noticed him studying me with a mix of concern and shock. It wasn't until later that I realized he had seen the bruises on my body, evidence of the abuse I had been trying so hard to hide. When morning came, I woke to find a carefully folded piece of paper next to my makeshift bed. With trembling hands, I unfolded it and began to read. "My dear Scarlett," it began, and I felt my heart skip a beat. Stephen's words were full of hope and determination. He wrote about the new life he wanted us to have, far away from the cruelty we'd both known. He promised to come back for me, to take me somewhere I'd be cherished and loved. As I read, tears streamed down my face. How could I deserve such devotion? But reality crashed back all too quickly. I knew my parents would be furious if they discovered I was gone. And now, with Stephen's letter, the stakes were even higher. If they found out about him, who knows what they might do? I breathed a sigh of relief when I realized my bedroom door was still locked from the outside. Maybe they hadn't even bothered to check on me, but my relief was short-lived. That very afternoon, as I tried to go about my usual chores to avoid suspicion, my mother found the letter. "What is this?" she screamed, waving the paper in my face. "Who's Stephen? What kind of relationship do you have with him?" I felt my blood run cold as she continued her tirade, her voice growing louder with each word. I tried to explain, to make her understand that Stephen was just someone I was trying to help, but she wouldn't listen. "A beggar?" she sneered. "You've been giving our food to a beggar?" Before I knew it, my parents were making plans to leave town. They talked about going to my grandparents' house in the country, staying there until Stephen gave up. I felt my world crumbling around me. How could I leave Stephen behind? How could I abandon the one person who had shown me true kindness? As my parents rushed around, packing bags and making frantic phone calls, I stood there frozen. I knew I had to make a decision, and fast. But what could I do? Where could I go? For the first time in my life, I truly understood what it meant to be trapped between a rock and a hard place. I never thought I'd be fighting so hard to stay in a place I'd always wanted to escape. But here I was, begging my parents not to take me away. "Please, I need to wait for him," I pleaded, but my words fell on deaf ears. My parents were already packing, determined to cut off any chance of me reuniting with Stephen. As chaos erupted around me, preparations for our hasty departure in full swing, I sat helplessly, clutching Stephen's letter like a lifeline. "Come back soon, please," I whispered to the paper, praying silently that Stephen would find me before it was too late. In the midst of this upheaval, I knew I had to act. While my mother rushed around packing bags, I formulated a desperate plan. I needed a hiding place, somewhere I could wait for Stephen, away from my parents' watchful, punishing eyes. Seizing a moment when my parents were distracted, I slipped outside. My heart pounded with each furtive step, threatening to give me away. Suddenly, my father's voice cut through the silence, sharp as a knife. "Where do you think you're going?" I froze, then slowly turned to face him, trying to mask my fear with determination. "I'm not going with you," I declared, my voice trembling but resolute. "I can't leave my life and Stephen behind." My father advanced, anger etched in every line of his face. "You don't have a choice, Scarlett. We're doing this for your own good." He reached for me, but I backed away, taking deep breaths to calm my rising panic. I darted back into the house, searching for a place to hide until I could find a way to escape. I slipped into the rarely visited attic, crouching behind some dusty boxes. It wasn't long before my parents found me. My mother held Stephen's letter, a look of bitter triumph on her face. "This ends now," she said. Ripping the letter and throwing the pieces into the fireplace, my mother watched with satisfaction as Stephen's words turned to ash. I stood there, devastated, unable to speak. Without a word, I was forcibly led out of the house and pushed into the car. The journey to my grandparents' old country house was quiet and tense. I knew that once we arrived, I'd never be able to leave. I was familiar with the structure of the old, almost derelict house, but escaping from there would be impossible. With each passing mile, it felt like another nail was being driven into the coffin of my future. Upon arrival, I was locked in a small room on the second floor. The barred window faced the front of the house, but it was too high to jump from, and the bars were too close together for me to slip through. I sat by the window, staring at the distant horizon. "I've lost Stephen," I whispered to the wind. "He'll never find me now, and I can't escape." A single tear rolled down my cheek as I realized the fight to protect my freedom and future with Stephen was over. Trapped in this room with its barred window, I desperately searched for a way out. I was determined to get back to Stephen, knowing he would return to the place he last saw me. I found a hairpin on the floor and tried to pick the lock. My fingers moved frantically, but with each failure, my fear of never seeing Stephen again grew. "I have to get out of here," I told myself, my labored breathing echoing in the quiet room as I worked on the lock. My mind raced with memories of Stephen, the kindness he'd shown me, the future we had dreamed of together. I couldn't let it end like this. I wouldn't. I never thought I'd be so desperate to escape a place I once called home. But here I was, my last hope, a flimsy hairpin, broken in my trembling hands. Frustration washed over me as I slumped against the cold wall, muttering, This can't be happening. The reality of my situation descended on me like a heavy curtain of despair. This attic room, once my sanctuary, now felt like a prison. Its narrow walls and isolation, which once offered solace, now only amplified my anguish and fear. I huddled in the corner, knees drawn to my chest, listening to the wind whistle through the gaps in the old wood. Each gust seemed to mockingly remind me of my hopeless situation. A new fear gripped me. What if my parents forgot to bring me food or water? I was trapped in this isolated part of the house, completely at their mercy. Why? Why did they hate me so much? I couldn't understand it. Though physically distant, I could hear my parents' voices echoing in my mind, discussing my punishment. My mother's harsh voice declared that I needed to learn I couldn't defy their authority. My father agreed, his voice a low growl of impending threat. But it was their next words that chilled me to the bone. "How much do you think she's worth?" my mother asked. Tears streamed down my face as the implications of her words sank in. Were they planning to sell me? The thought was too horrifying to contemplate. I tried to make myself smaller, as if I could disappear into the walls. Every minute in this attic was a minute won against whatever fate my parents had planned for me, but also a minute lost, a minute further from Stephen. He must be looking for me. I whispered to myself, trying to inject some hope into my crushed spirit. I have to find a way back to him. As night fell and the temperature dropped, I crawled to the small broken fireplace. Using scraps of wood I found scattered around, I managed to start a small fire. The flickering flames offered little comfort, but it was enough to warm my body and provide a glimmer of solace. "God, please help me," I prayed, watching the shadows dance on the walls. "Let Stephen find me." Despite the weight of uncertainty pressing down on me like a suffocating blanket, a spark of determination still burned in the depths of my heart. I would survive this. I would reunite with Stephen and escape my parents' oppressive grip. As I finally drifted off to sleep, my face illuminated by the dying embers, I clung to dreams of freedom and the dark promise of seeing Stephen again. Tomorrow, I thought. Tomorrow, when they bring food, I might have a chance to get out of here. In the pre-dawn darkness, I was jolted awake by the distant sound of an approaching car. My heart leaped. Could it be someone coming to help me? I wanted to bang on the window, to scream for help, but fear of punishment held me back. Instead, I peered through the barred window, trying to see who had arrived. As I watched and waited, I realized that every decision, every moment, could be the difference between freedom and captivity, between a life with Stephen and a future I couldn't bear to imagine. I had to be smart, I had to be brave, and above all, I had to hold on to hope. It was all I had left. I never thought I'd see Stephen again, let alone looking like this. As I peered through the bars, I could barely recognize the well-dressed man stepping out of an unfamiliar car. But when he turned toward the house, my heart skipped a beat. It was Stephen, but not the Stephen I remembered. He had transformed, elegantly dressed, his posture radiating confidence. I pressed my face against the bars, tears of relief mingling with a surge of new hope. How did he get those clothes? That car? What's going on? I whispered to myself, my mind racing with questions. As Stephen approached the front door, my parents emerged to confront him. I could see everything from my vantage point, but they couldn't see me. My father's gruff and suspicious voice demanded to know who Stephen was and what he wanted. Stephen's response was firm and clear. He told them he had come for me, that he was here to take me away. I strained to hear their words, but the thick walls of this old house muffled their voices. My mother's voice, dripping with sarcasm, cut through the air. She sneered that Stephen didn't look like a beggar anymore, asking if he really thought he could just come here and take their daughter. But Stephen remained calm in the face of their accusations. He declared that I deserved a better life than the one filled with fear and violence that they had provided. He said he had the means to take care of me, to give me the life I deserved. I watched as my parents exchanged glances, probably thinking about selling me to the highest bidder. Neither of them truly cared about me when my father challengingly asked what would happen if they refused. Stephen's response sent chills down my spine. If they refused, he told them he would have to take legal measures to ensure my safety, including revealing to the police everything he knew about how they treated me. His voice was as cold as the morning air. As I continued to watch from the window, I felt a mix of admiration and fear for what Stephen might face for my sake. When he mentioned having resources, I realized he must have carefully planned each step before coming to find me. My mother, realizing they were at a disadvantage, changed tactics. She lied, saying I had gone to live with an aunt far away and wouldn't be coming back. She demanded compensation for everything they had done for me if Stephen wanted me to return. Stephen nodded, seeing through their lies. "You're trying to sell your own daughter," he stated. "Where is Scarlett? I don't believe she's gone." But my mother insisted, closing the door in Stephen's face. As I watched his car begin to pull away, desperation overwhelmed me. My mother's words echoed in my mind, a cruel sentence of eternal isolation. With my heart pounding uncontrollably, I began banging on the window bars with all my might, screaming Stephen's name. Even though I knew it was almost impossible for him to hear me over the distance, and the strong wind rustling the trees outside, I couldn't stop. "Stephen, Stephen, please don't go," I cried, my voice raw with emotion. Each second his car moved further away felt like another blow of crushing despair. In the car, Stephen felt a growing uneasiness. Something wasn't right. Just as he was about to accelerate, a faint sound, almost swallowed by the wind, reached his ears. He slammed on the brakes, his intuition screaming for attention. Stephen's heart raced as he leaped out of the car and ran back toward the house. I was still pounding on the window, my body shaking not just from the cold, but from the fear of losing him forever. Suddenly, Stephen's silhouette appeared in the morning mist. "Scarlett," he shouted, locating me with determination burning in his eyes. He approached the door and began pounding on it, demanding my parents release me. The confrontation that followed was tense and charged with emotion. As I watched from above, I realized that this moment would define the rest of my life. Freedom was so close, yet still just out of reach. But Stephen was here, fighting for me, and for the first time in a long time, I dared to hope. I never thought I'd hear Stephen speak with such determination and authority. As I listened from my attic prison, his words echoed through the house. "You have no right to keep her locked up like this. Scarlett deserves to be free, and I'll do whatever it takes to make sure that happens." My parents were caught between rage and fear of legal consequences. I could hear the panic in my mother's voice as she threatened Stephen, telling him I would never go with him and that she'd call the police for trespassing. But Stephen didn't flinch. I felt utterly helpless, trapped upstairs with no way to get down and out. The argument escalated quickly, and in the chaos, someone called the police. When they arrived, the scene must have been enough for them to take immediate action. My heart raced as I heard the commotion downstairs. Suddenly, Stephen was there, rushing to my side. "Are you hurt? Did they harm you, Scarlett?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. I assured him I was okay, though I was overwhelmed by the rapid turn of events. As my parents were taken away, I made the difficult decision not to press further charges. The police seemed surprised by my compassion, but I explained, I just want to move on with my life, away from the hatred and pain they caused me. My voice was steady but full of emotion. Stephen stood by me, offering the support I so desperately needed. He gently took my hand and promised, "Let's start a new life together, Scarlett. A life where you can be truly free, where you can have anything you want." I moved closer to him, my eyes reflecting a clear determination. All I wanted was a little peace in my life, to live as a normal woman, to study, work, and have a family. I had endured enough pain and resentment. Even though I chose not to press charges, the police couldn't overlook the conditions they found me in. My parents were arrested for what they had done. As we left the police station, I had so many questions for Stephen, but he simply led me to a massive mansion without explanation. Stepping inside, I felt like a princess in an enormous castle. It was so luxurious that I stood there, mouth agape, following Stephen through the house. I felt as though I had entered a completely different world. The opulence of this place was in stark contrast to the simplicity and adversity I had faced until now. Stephen guided me through hallways adorned with art and furniture that looked like museum pieces. "This is unbelievable," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "But why didn't you tell me about all this? Whose house is this? How did you get that car? And all of this?" My curiosity was tinged with a hint of apprehension. I feared that what Stephen hadn't told me might change the feelings I had started to develop for him. Stephen sighed, stopping in front of a large window that offered a dazzling view of illuminated gardens. He began to explain his past, a life of comfort but also loneliness and betrayal. People had always expected something from him, interested only in his money and what he could provide. As I listened to his story, I held his hand tightly. I couldn't understand why he had to suffer so much. "But you were so sick. You almost died," I said, turning him to face me. He nodded, his eyes intense. "Yes, but in my mind, I had been sick and alone for a long time before that. Living there with you was better than this luxurious life without love." Stephen's words warmed my heart. I had found someone who fought for me, who truly cared. "That means everything to me, Scarlett," he said. As he continued to reveal more about his past, I smiled, moved by his sincerity. "You did make a difference, at least for me. But what do we do now?" Stephen's response filled me with hope. "I want to start over, Scarlett, this time with you by my side. I want to make you as happy as you deserve to be, to make you smile every day, and to show you that the world can be wonderful with the right person beside you. What do you want, my Scarlett?" In that moment, standing there with Stephen, I realized that sometimes life's greatest blessings come disguised as our biggest challenges. I had endured so much, but it had led me here, to this moment, to him. For the first time in my life, I felt truly seen, truly valued, and I was ready to embrace whatever the future held, as long as we faced it together. I never thought I'd find myself in the arms of someone who truly understood and loved me. But here I was, embracing Stephen with tears of joy in my eyes. I've always dreamed of studying, working, and someday having a family that truly loves each other without fear or hesitation, I confessed, my voice trembling with emotion. Stephen's response warmed my heart. He promised we'd make those dreams a reality together, sealing his words with a tender kiss. It felt like the beginning of a new chapter in my life, one filled with hope and possibility. As days turned into weeks and weeks into months, our love blossomed, healing old wounds and strengthening our bond. I threw myself into my studies, just as I had always wanted, with Stephen by my side every step of the way, encouraging and supporting me. We planned our future together and eventually celebrated our love with a simple yet meaningful wedding ceremony. As we strolled through our garden after the ceremony, I couldn't help but marvel at how far we'd come. It all started with an act of kindness on a dark street, I reminisced. "You changed my life, Stephen. You gave me hope when I had nowhere to go. I'm healthier now, stronger both in body and spirit. Though I now wear elegant clothes, what I cherish the most is having someone who truly loves me." Stephen squeezed my hand gently, his smile full of affection. "You gave me something worth fighting for, Scarlett," he said. "A reason to believe in goodness again." Together, we felt compelled to give hope to others. We established a charity dedicated to helping people in vulnerable situations, like Stephen once was. Our project grew rapidly, fueled by our passionate commitment and Stephen's newfound purpose in philanthropy. During one of our planning meetings, I suggested we call it Light for Tomorrow. because no matter how dark the past, everyone deserves a chance at a new beginning, I explained. Stephen agreed, his eyes full of admiration. It's perfect. You are my light for tomorrow, Scarlett. As time passed, our organization touched many lives, its positive impact resonating throughout the community. I often worked on the front lines, directly with those in need, as living proof that change was possible. 7 years later, on a sunny afternoon, I watched children playing in our foundation's courtyard. I felt a small hand slip into mine, and looked down to see our eldest son gazing up at me with curiosity and admiration. "Mom, were you always this brave?" he asked. I crouched down to his eye level, smiling. "I learned to be brave, my love. I learned that sometimes you have to be strong, not just for yourself, but for others too." As our family grew, I never forgot the lessons of my past. My parents remained in prison, a dark reminder of the hardships I'd overcome. We made the difficult decision to deny them access to our resources, preserving the integrity and security of the new life we had built. Watching Stephen play with our children, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. We had built something special together, not just a family bound by love and respect, but a place that reached beyond our walls to help others. "We're making the difference, Stephen," I said, smiling as he approached and wrapped his arms around me. "Yes, we are," he replied, kissing me softly. "And we'll keep doing it together, always." As we stood there, wrapped in each other's love, we looked to the future with hope and determination. We knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we could face them together, turning any adversity into opportunity. Our journey had taught us that even the darkest beginnings can lead to the brightest of futures.
Hi, my name is Sarah, and I'm 26 years old. I became an orphan when I was young because my parents sadly died in a car accident. Since they didn't have any family to take care of me, I was placed in an orphanage. I spent about 3 years there before I was adopted. My adoptive parents turned out to be billionaires, which changed my life completely. After that, I enjoyed a wealthy and fulfilling life. They didn't want to make my adoption a big deal, so they kept it low-key. They believed in doing good things without drawing too much attention to themselves. When I became an adult and moved into my own place, my adoptive parents decided to expand their business. They took a trip to Europe to look for new opportunities. It was during this time that I met Mark, who is now my ex-husband. We met in college and hit it off right away. After just a few conversations, I found myself really liking him. Mark was a cheerful and caring guy, and as we went on dates, we officially became a couple. We seemed to have the perfect relationship, but there was one major issue: Mark's family did not like me. The first time I met them was after we graduated from college. Mark wanted to introduce me to his parents only when we were both settled in our lives, meaning we both had good jobs. He had warned me that his parents could be a bit judgmental when it came to who their children dated, and he wanted me to make a great impression. I was nervous about meeting them. By the time Mark introduced me to his parents, we had been dating for 4 years, and we were also engaged. I thought that might complicate things, since his parents didn't even know me as his girlfriend. I remember feeling anxious about it with Mark the day before the meeting. "They're going to hate me," I told him. "They won't, I promise," Mark reassured me. "Do you really think they won't be shocked when they find out we're engaged?" "Well, yeah, but I don't think it'll be that big of a deal." "Are you serious? You were nervous about introducing me to them because you know how judgmental they are. You really think telling them we're engaged won't make them judge me even more?" "Look, even if they do judge, will it really matter what they say?" "It won't matter to me, but I'm not sure about you. You always seem so careful about what they think." "I promise it won't affect me at all, Sarah." "All right, if you say so. But do you think we should maybe wait to tell them we're engaged, like a month later? Will that make you feel better about this whole thing?" I'm fine with whatever you decide. I think we should keep it a secret for now, just in case. I'll do anything to win them over. You don't have to worry. I'll be with you no matter what. Thanks, Mark. The main reason I had been so anxious was that every time I suggested to Mark that he tell his parents about me, he would get upset and say they wouldn't approve. I started to understand why he felt that way. Mark's family was quite wealthy and loved to live in luxury. They wanted the same for their children, and they only accepted their kids dating people who were just as rich or even richer. At that time, my life didn't match up to their standards of wealth. I hadn't told Mark much about my family because I didn't see the point. Plus, by the time I figured out why he was so hesitant to let me meet his parents, I felt it was even less necessary for them to know who my father was. I wanted them to like me for who I am, not for my background. I foolishly believed that they could appreciate me without focusing on my money, but I was wrong. We decided to meet Mark's parents at a fancy restaurant. As we walked in, Mark held my hand tightly. I wore my engagement ring around my neck so I could keep it close without drawing attention to it. But as soon as we arrived at our table, I could see that his parents were already upset. Mark warned me to expect that because they were strict about being on time. We had arrived exactly 2 minutes late, so we were already off to a bad start. His parents looked me up and down with disdain, and then they ignored me for a while as they chatted with Mark. I felt so small in their presence. The longer they acted like I wasn't there, the stronger my urge grew to leave. I kept my head down, trying to avoid their gaze until finally, Mark spoke up to get their attention. "Mom, Dad, you can't just keep talking to me like this. This is my wonderful girlfriend, Sarah." "Oh, hello. It's a pleasure to meet both of you," I said, wishing I could honestly say the same. "Hi," his mother replied, her tone icy. "What?" I thought, surprised. "I'm just speaking the truth," she said. "So, Sarah, I heard you and Mark met in college. Is that right?" she continued. "Yes, we did. We happened to share some classes together. And how did you manage to attend this college?" "From what I know, the tuition is quite high, and it's a tough place to get into." "Dad, that's enough," Mark interrupted. "You will not speak to your father that way. He's asking a valid question. Sarah, please answer him." "Well, I got a full ride there. I'm really grateful because not only did I learn a lot, but I also got to meet Mark, which has been one of the best things that's happened to me." "Of course it's one of the best things for you," his mother sneered. "He's loaded, and you need that kind of money. At least you have some brains because your looks aren't all that impressive, you know." "That's enough," Mark said angrily. "We're leaving. Come on, Sarah." As we walked out, I was in shock at how his parents had treated me. I couldn't believe people could be so cruel, especially to someone's face. I felt too stunned to even process my emotions. The car ride home was silent because Mark was furious. When we finally reached home, Mark checked to see if I was okay, but honestly, I didn't even know how to feel at that moment. I had dressed up nicely and made sure to sit properly. I didn't order anything expensive, yet somehow, without me saying a word, Abigail and Charles had made their judgments about me. After that awful dinner, Mark didn't talk to his parents for a while. They sent him a text saying that we had been very disrespectful for walking out on them during lunch. Mark didn't respond right away and only texted them about a month later to tell them that he had gotten engaged. His parents were not happy about the news, but Mark warned them that he wouldn't contact them again if they said anything bad about me. Mark's parents offered to pay for our wedding, but only if they could make all the decisions. Neither of us wanted that, so we decided to do the next best thing, elope. My adoptive parents were in Europe, but they knew about our plan to elope. They were just happy that I was happy, and they even sent Mark and me a gift. Mark raised his eyebrows when they sent us a pretty expensive painting, but I brushed it off, thinking they just had the money to spend on it. After we got married, we met Abigail and Charles at a party they hosted to celebrate their anniversary. To be honest, I was somewhat happy they invited me, even though they didn't seem to like me much. But when we arrived, I was ignored by everyone. If you think being ignored by 2 people is embarrassing, try being ignored by about 30. I stayed close to Mark, but no one made an effort to talk to me. Whenever I tried to join a conversation, people would look me up and down and walk away, or they would keep talking to Mark as if I hadn't even spoken. By the end of the night, I was in tears. I felt humiliated and disgusted by how everyone was treating me. Toward the end of the evening, the crowd asked Abigail and Charles to give a speech. I was tired and wanted to go home, but during their speech, they started talking about how grateful they were to have everyone in the room in their lives. That was just the first jab they threw at me. They kept making more jokes that made the guests laugh. At some point, I couldn't take it anymore and got up to leave. I ordered an Uber and went home, crying the whole way. When Mark finally got home, he seemed upset and angry. "Why did you walk out like that? Do you know how embarrassing that was for me?" he asked. "What are you talking about?" I replied, feeling hurt. "Don't play dumb with me right now. Sarah, I had to endure my parents yelling at me while a lot of the guests pitied me for being with you. Are you serious? What about how embarrassing it was for me?" I shot back. "Oh, come on, Sarah. You could have dealt with it for one night. It was my parents' anniversary, for God's sake. I was ignored by everyone, and your parents chose to make fun of me during their toast. How can you expect me to be okay with that? I'm not saying what they did was right, but you could have just gotten through it. I would have spoken to them about it after. What would that have done for me? I don't like being put in situations where I'm humiliated." Everyone was laughing at me. "You've never been in that position before, so it's easy for you to talk about it like it's nothing. My parents expect an apology from you," he demanded. "I want one too," I replied, feeling defiant. "I'm afraid I won't be doing that. I'll only apologize if they apologize to me first. I see no reason to apologize to you. You always stood up for me. I don't see why this is any different. This is very different. You humiliated my family in front of all their guests. And your parents humiliated me, your wife, in front of everyone. Maybe my parents were right about you." "You're impossible," Mark snapped before going to sleep in the guest bedroom. I couldn't understand why he had such a sudden change in behavior. Was it really that bad for him after I walked out? He was usually the first person to stand up for me, especially when his parents said hurtful things. For me to walk out should have shown just how awful they made me feel, yet Mark didn't seem to care about that. Mark didn't talk to me for the next week. I also received a lot of texts from his parents, calling me ungrateful and an embarrassment. I tried to reach out to Mark, but he refused to talk to me. I decided it was time to apologize to Mark and his parents. Even though that felt humiliating, I was willing to do it because I loved Mark, and I didn't want this to be the thing that ruined our relationship. Unfortunately, things only got worse for me after that. Mark's parents retired and started hosting family dinners every week, and Mark was always invited. The first time they had a dinner after our wedding, Mark brought me along with him to their house. As soon as I stepped inside, I could feel the awkwardness in the air. Abigail was busy getting ready and didn't see me right away, but Charles and Mark's siblings glanced at me awkwardly. They didn't talk to me, and Mark left me standing there alone while he caught up with his family. When Abigail finally came downstairs, she spotted me and practically stormed over, furious. "What are you doing here?" she demanded. "Excuse me," I replied, taken aback. "No, I will not excuse you. What are you doing in my house right now? Well, you invited us for dinner, I said, trying to keep my cool. Wrong. I invited Mark because it's a family dinner. I'm Mark's wife, so I'm part of this family, am I not? Absolutely not. An orphan like you deserves no place in this family, she snapped. What? You thought you could hide that detail from us? We do background checks on our children's spouses, and you are not in my son's league whatsoever. I will never accept you here. Why not? Is that the only thing that determines whether I get to be part of your family? You're judging me because of my background. You're ugly and poor. You never fit into our elite circles. Why are you being so superficial? Are you scared I'll damage your reputation just by existing? Does the fact that I make your son happy not satisfy you? If happiness could make someone rich, then a lot of people would be billionaires. This is exactly why you'll never fit in with us. Or maybe I'll just never be as superficial as the rest of you because I value who a person really is. You never even took the chance to know me before judging me. I'm glad I don't fit in with you. Sarah, that's enough. Here's some money, get yourself an Uber and leave, Abigail sneered. I stared at Mark in shock as he held out the cash. He shoved it into my hands and turned back toward his mother, who smirked at me. Tears filled my eyes as I turned and walked out, feeling crushed once again. I cried the entire ride home in the Uber. I didn't understand why Mark had changed so much. Was this his way of making it up to his parents after the party? Whatever it was, it hurt, and I was angry with him. He was okay with his parents using my past as an insult while defending them instead of me, like he usually did. I wanted to scream, but I knew that would only make me look worse and prove their judgments right, so I walked away. I tried to think if I had said anything out of line, but I truly believed I hadn't. I was just standing up for myself, and I had done it calmly. After Mark came back home, he went back to ignoring me. My heart was breaking, and I felt so alone. I knew he expected another apology, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. After all, Abigail had insulted me in the worst way, and Mark was angry at me for standing up for myself. If anything, I thought I deserved an apology from him. For the next 2 weeks, Mark and I didn't talk to each other. It was hard at first, but I eventually got used to it. The family dinners still happened every week, and I spent those evenings alone at home, which, to be honest, I didn't mind too much. One night, my parents video called me. "Hey, honey," they greeted. "Hey, sweetie. How's it going?" my dad asked. "Hey, Dad." "Hey, Mom. Things are not good." "What's wrong, sweetie? If you need help with anything, feel free to ask us." "I don't think this is something you guys can help me with, but thanks for offering," I replied. "Where's Mark? Is he not helping?" my mom asked. "That's the thing, he's part of the problem." "Oh, sweetie, could you be a little clearer about what the problem is?" my dad asked. "Well, his parents are pretty wealthy and very snobby," I explained. "Oh, I hate those kinds of people," my mom said, sounding furious. "Tell me about it." "Anyway, they think I'm just some poor girl who can't live up to their standards and fit into their elite circles. They've made it their mission to humiliate me every time I meet them." "What the hell?" my mom exclaimed. "Oh yeah, and the last time I went over, Mark's mom thought it would be funny to call me an orphan as an insult. Oh, that woman. I'm going to claw her face off. How dare she call my precious child an orphan? Do they not know about us? What the hell has Mark been doing through all of this?" I didn't tell my parents about Mark because I knew their opinion of me would change if they found out, and I wanted them to like me for who I truly am, not for my wealth. But now Mark was siding with his parents and thought I was disrespectful for standing up for myself. "Honey, are you sure this is the man you want to be with?" my mom asked. I love him a lot, but this isn't how I want things to be. We haven't spoken to each other in 2 weeks, and surprisingly, I'm okay with that. All right, sweetie. I'll get you in touch with one of my friends over there. Don't worry about us not being able to help you out. I think we might actually be able to help you get a little sweet revenge. Huh? What do you mean? Your dad and I are coming there next week. We wanted to take you and Mark on vacation, but now we can do more things together without him. Really? Oh my God. I'm so excited to finally see you both in person again. I said, feeling the boost I needed. For the first time in a while, I felt genuinely happy. We continued talking for a little while longer. My dad explained his plan to help me, and after a while, he asked where these family dinners were being held. As far as I knew, Mark's parents took turns hosting at their house and at different restaurants. Conveniently, the week my parents were coming, the dinner was scheduled at a restaurant. I needed to find out the exact location so I could give it to my parents. Thankfully, I had Mark's email on my phone. I knew that Abigail and Charles loved to send emails to everyone about everything. It wasn't hard to find out the location, and I shared it with my parents. At the same time, my mom's lawyer friend contacted me, and we began the process of filing for divorce. When my parents arrived in the States, they checked into their hotel, and I went to meet them. We had lunch together, and afterward, they treated me to a spa day, paying for everything because they thought I deserved it. While I enjoyed my spa day, they were preparing to get revenge on my in-laws. My parents walked into the restaurant where Mark and his family were dining. According to my dad, when they approached the table, Charles and Abigail started murmuring among themselves, recognizing who he was. Mom later told me how the conversation went. "Hello," my dad said. "Oh my gosh, Mr. Larry, what brings you here?" Charles asked. "Oh wow, I just happened to see some familiar faces and thought I could drop in and dine with you." Familiar faces. Who are you talking about, Mr. Larry? Well, I see Mark. Hello, a pleasure to meet you. Your daughter has spoken a lot about you. But speaking of my daughter, where is she? Your daughter? I'm afraid you're mistaken. I don't think she's here, Abigail replied. But she should be, right? I'm sorry, Mr. Larry, but we didn't even know you had a daughter, Charles added. Of course I do, and she's married to Mark. What? I'm sorry, but I think you're mistaken, Abigail stammered. Yes, his wife's name is Sarah, and she was an orphan. Yes, I do know that, and that's why we adopted her. Excuse me. You're her dad? Charles asked, shocked. Yes, and from what I see, she isn't here. She's told me that she's had some problems with her in-laws, but now I see what the problem is. It's you. No, she was the one who hid this huge detail from us. If we had known, we would have treated her better, Abigail tried to defend herself. She didn't want you to treat her nicely because of her background. Oh well, she asked me to hand this over to Mark. My dad handed Mark the divorce papers and walked out. After that, it took only a couple of phone calls from many investors to pull away from Charles's business. It was satisfying to watch them crash down to the level they had once mocked. I received numerous texts from Mark's family, some calling me nasty names while others begged me to talk to my dad and ask him what he had done. Fortunately, Mark signed the divorce papers without any hassle. After that, my parents and I went on a long vacation together. I had the time of my life and slowly began to heal. It hurt to lose the love of my life, but I also learned how important it is to stand up for myself. I'll be forever grateful to my parents for everything they've done for me, and I can't wait to see what else life has in store for me.